Hello, everybody! If it's Wednesday, it's Warhammer, and that must mean it's time for another episode of Warhammer Weekly. Joining me, as always, is I don't know what kind of data or value he's adding into my life, but here he is anyways. It's Tom. What's up, buddy?
I am like AI ListBot embodied.
Speaking of, we've got the man, the myth, the legend, the master himself, JP Ganis, creator of ListBot, amongst many other accolades. But hey, how you doing there, brother? It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, super stoked to be here. Thanks a lot.
No issue. All right. So we got a lot to talk about tonight. First, I purposely went for the clickbait title today for the show in the, in does skill matter in Age of Sigmar? I love it. We usually avoid clickbait titles, but this episode is going to be so spicy that I just thought, let's go all the way. Get ready.
There's going to be so much salt on the other side of this.
We're going to take you on a journey, a data journey tonight, and it's going to be exciting. Tell your friends, tell your wife, tell everybody the spicy data journey has begun. Okay. So, but of course, as always, let's start with the news. So, Tom, kick us off. What do we got?
Rumor engine?
It's up. No one cares. Great. It's a 40K thing. I literally couldn't care less.
I hate when they give us things that are obviously not anything we care about.
The only thing worth talking about on this rumor engine is still how poor the metal paints they're using are. Because even in black and white, I can see the pigment from space. Whereas their matte paints have this smooth, glorious application all the way around the thing. And then this metal paint just looks like they're painting with glitter.
Oh, Vince. You and metal paint. Okay, so let's talk about the real news item this week. Curse City's gone.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's right there. But but in broad sense, yes. It is.
Soon to be gone on eBay, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, look, we don't need to roast this too hard. Basic story. Let's get some facts out there. Curse City came out. The original communications from the team was that from the community team, I should say, was that there was going to be more. People have got plenty of receipts on this. You don't need me to talk about it more.
Yep.
Which means they did have plans to produce more, because the community team doesn't just go off on their own and start saying stuff. They're delivering pre-approved messaging.
Right.
Curse City launches. Obviously, there's a huge demand for it. Huge, crazy high demand for it, because this is an incredible box set. And then we get surreptitiously, a couple days after launch, in a subtweet response, they had posted about something else.
Yep.
Somebody said, hey,
and
what up with
asked,
that Curse City? Yep. And in a subtweet they said, Curse City is done, we're not making any more. Check your local retailers.
And then when you went to go look at what they had previously said, they quietly deleted all the prior responses in social media where they said that they were going to be more was going to be coming.
Yeah.
So they covered their tracks and had a single response in a subtweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's the internet, so nothing. Look, much like Star Wars, no one's ever really gone.
Sure.
But yeah, okay. Then there was a letter that went out to stores.
And this is what not a lot of people know about. Not everybody knows about the letter.
Sure, and it didn't give a lot more information. Let me just say, it was basically that subtweet in form, except that we got the following. It said, basically, Curse City will no longer be produced. We're not making any more. We've directed people toward you, retailers, to find it. Which, by the way, there are a lot of stores that still do have this on the shelf.
Right.
One of the problems we have here is we have this sort of slack problem, right, where it's not equitably distributed into where it's needed.
Right.
So, my true advice is, knowing that this is the case, we can all complain, but at the same time, let's be a good community for each other and reach out. If you're somebody who's really wanting one and you really want it, reach out on social media. If you know you've got a local store that has some, help people out, help direct them to that store. Let's take care of our friends and community members in this, because the reality is, I've seen it happen a lot already where somebody's like, I really need one. Somebody's like, well, I got an extra one on the store, the shelf in my store. I'll grab it for you, or whatever. I don't care how you do it.
I did that for a content creator.
Yeah.
Where like they had wanted something, and I said, hey, I know we have some locally. We have a bunch of stores. Do you want one?
Yeah. So first things first, regardless of whatever happened with GW in this, the answer is always for us to be a good community and take care of each other. That is what we should do. Period.
It's paramount.
Okay. Yep. Now, the letter that went to stores said basically, we're not going to be making any more of this. Didn't say why. There's a million reasons of speculation. I don't know what any of them are. No one knows what any of them are who doesn't work outside that building. There's been rumors of molds breaking or legal issues or, fire that destroyed something critical in the process, or the shipping because of getting all the cardboard and all the stuff from China and the time lead on that. The new trade laws with the UK around what happens if a product's more than 70% made of imported products and then is exported that has higher tariffs. Like, I don't know. And I don't suspect anybody else does either, unless you work in that building. So it's not worth speculating on. It's clearly something.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that sounds vapid and stupid.
It's so insightful, Vince.
But, thank you. What I mean by that is, they would love to make money, right?
There are reasons why it is no longer available.
Right. So they didn't just, make it limited to screw us over. That wasn't the goal. They really would like to make more money, okay? As with their shareholders, I'm sure. So, they likely had some significant and untenable problem that they could not overcome, and as a result had to make a really rough decision that they probably didn't want to make. That's terrible and a shame. Okay. One of the things they did have in the note that went to stores was that that they said, we are looking at the possibility of releasing some of the sprues in a different format individually in the future. Okay? Which tells me that at least some of the molds are still intact. So that's good. Now,
I mean, I can't imagine, if they had any degree of product preparation for expansions, I can't imagine that they don't move heaven and earth to re-secure the ability to provide some base core games again. Now, we could be a year and a half out from that, right?
Or 6 months. And when that comes out, everybody's going to lose their mind again when they come out with the first expansion for Curse City. And everybody's like, well, I don't have my Curse City. You didn't have enough for me to buy. That's going to be a fun conversation.
It's going to be amazing because it's coming, right?
Yeah.
But when that expansion drops, the point being that when that expansion drops, but you said 6 months. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see the expansion 6 months because it gets pushed out to a line back when they can provide core games again.
Or it gets pushed to it and repackaged in a different way.
Right.
If I'm them and I've made a bunch of expansions for Curse City, I am immediately ripping all of them out of the boxes and ordering new boxes that say Soulblight Gravelords and welcome to Soulblight Gravelords Part 2. I'm going to gather them all together. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to gather them all together into one new release called Soulblight Gravelords Part 2.
With this board game you can play on the side if you want.
Right. This new release for Soulblight Gravelords can also be used in Curse City. We'll give you the rules for free as a PDF. Yes. Yeah. See how you can turn it right around? This is easy stuff. All right. It's that product management brain working. So, anyways, the clear flaw here, and a lot of people have said in the comments, and I'm certainly in agreement with it, is that they didn't and haven't and probably don't plan to communicate on this. Right? If they were going to send a message, they would have already. Period. And as a matter of fact, the letter that went to the stores said, we will not be sending any communication on this. It was very clear.
I think
I love... No, go ahead, JP.
I was just going to say, I think maybe one thing is I think, and this maybe started even when Age of Sigmar came out, is I've loved seeing like Games Workshop just sort of, burst into the future in terms of like being like a big gaming company and this stuff. But I think it is sort of, it's like right now in 2021, it's like so many companies have these huge teams of people completely dedicated to like, how are we going to show ourselves on Twitter?
Yes.
Like you need to keep up with with woke this and woke that. You got to make sure your customers are happy. You got to know all the good memes. And, I don't think GW have that yet. And I think it's sort of like in situations like this where you're sad, where you're like, the models, oh my God, the models are so amazing. I'm sure Curse City is a really sick game. And you're just sort of like, I don't know what happened in the year of, COVID/Brexit/ the cursed fire of all the, the mold sprues. But it's like, it's really sad sort of that the game has to be overshadowed by this, as you say, because they maybe just don't know how to correctly communicate with the community in a way that we expect by seeing, maybe these companies have had more practice or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I really think that the real problem is probably something significant in some way.
Yeah.
And that would lead them to not communicate it because they are a publicly traded company and nothing shakes shareholder value. Like, here is a
incompetence.
Well, no, it doesn't. No. It doesn't have to be that. No, I disagree.
Like, or I'm saying like major logistical issue, like
correct.
Major
yes, here is a supply chain
mismanagement.
problem we can't solve that poses an existential risk to the future of our company. You don't really want to put that on blast.
Yeah. Okay. Every employee that worked on it has died in mysterious circumstances.
I mean, there have been a bunch of logistics positions. There have been a bunch of logistics positions open recently. So I'm saying.
So, like that public traded need means that they're always walking this really tight communication line of like wanting to share openly with us, but also being really worried about scaring shareholders, right? Investors.
Yep.
And look, if you want to know how I feel about that, obviously that's dumb, and I don't care. I don't care about your investors, but I'm sure they do. Like, I play your game, and you should care about the people who play your game, because if those people go away, then guess what? Your investors also lose.
They're actually your income. Yes.
Yeah. But
I mean, what I would say is this. I think that I would agree with JP that I think that their like messaging management reflects older policies rather than kind of contemporary trends. And I think a little bit of transparency can generate just an immense amount of goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about that with things like the KO book and stuff like this. Like, we've been down this road before. Silence is not the right answer. Like, and I don't know why they think it is.
Well, I think
because
oh, sorry, carry on.
I would say, because ultimately what it does is, to take a lead from John Oliver, it allows people like us to just fill in the blank with whatever we want that reality to be. Because now the messaging becomes all the community, the loud voices of the community. So if we want to say, you know what, it's because GW blah, whatever it is. I'm not going to put it on blast. I'm not going to make up some vicious rumor. But what I will say is this, it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum is going to be filled with something.
Yeah, nature abhors a vacuum. Yes, indeed.
Right.
All right, enough about this. Look, I'm still looking for a second Vargskier and three more of those little vampire dudes, so I got to get on that now, because those little vampire dudes and the second Vargskier are key to one of my armies I'm building, so probably going to have to pay through the nose on those.
Their value is scaling significantly.
I know.
Yeah.
And you know my rule on buying something that costs more than $20. It's really going to come back to bite me here.
It is. You're going to have to like trade dual lands or something like that for the value that those plastic models are suddenly going down.
Tom, I see your play here to try to get it by dual lands, and it's not happening. You can put that on.
I mean, I do have some models.
Sure. Not going to happen, Tom. I'll tell you what. I'll give you you can have a beta pearl unicorn. There you go. That's what I'll give you, Tom. All right. So at any rate, let's get into the rest of the news. No, I don't want to tarry on this.
Be'lakor and other stuff is up for pre-order.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Excited. I've got my order in. I'm very excited about big Be'lakor. We'll do a whole review show. Not going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the book is leaked. Yeah.
Ooh. Night Haunt, spicy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, hot take real quick. JP, have you seen stuff in the book yet, or have you watched any of the reviews of it yet?
I've sort of seen it. I've taken a lot of it secondhand. I think it looks cool. Again, I think the models are super cool. I think right now, like in some ways, my competitive mind, given like a year or however long it's been, 10,000 years of not really playing intense Warhammer, I've deviated more towards like, I see the models, I'm like, whoa, these models are cool. I can't wait to play Warhammer again. And that's definitely just keeping going here. So, and I know I played a fair amount of Nighthaunt, and I know there's the new guy out for Nighthaunt who, again, hard to see, haven't seen necessarily list with him, but he's got a powerful buff with that 5-up after save. So,
oh yeah,
he's okay.
I disagree. I think he's hot. But anyways, we'll get into it. It'll be a fun discussion.
It's a good buff. Then you add but like a lot of these things, it's not until you see what the list is that you can really say.
Of course,
right. That's exactly right. He's okay. What I will say though is, picking up a second general in that Reichnor battalion or the Reichnor sub-allegiance, be able to teleport to 2 different locations on the battlefield.
No,
spicy.
Yeah, Nighthaunt stonks are it's going up. It's hard stonks on the Nighthaunt.
Right.
But yeah,
and then KO too. Now just win harder.
Sure. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. I don't know. Maybe next week. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly when we're going to do the Broken Realms or Be'lakor show. Probably can't wait too long, or it's going to butt up against Kragnos again. All right. So at any rate,
how it goes. We have a couple more news items. Hold on, I gotta find
you.
So, and then in the midst of all of this, we have no new pre-orders until May.
Mm-hmm.
F.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Like
they're waiting to hire that other logistics manager. Sure. They had a bunch of positions in order to be able to begin shipping again. That must be what's going on here.
My honest answer is I am glad they stalled pre-orders for a couple weeks. Like, fine, good. As many have said, they probably should have done that 8 months ago, 9 months ago, something like that, right? They probably should have said just like, hey, we're gonna pause pre-orders and releases for a month and get everything in line and blah 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 and push everything back, and we would have had a lot less of this sort of jumping around. But I mean, they'll be back in May. It's fine. There's plenty of stuff that has released here that we're all trying to get our hands on desperately, and they're not really meeting current demand. So I'm hoping that this allows them to start meeting the actual demand out there. They've built a audience that's really big that wants to buy this stuff. There wasn't enough Be'lakors to go around. There wasn't enough Cursed Cities. So, and again, it's tough because it's slack, I'm sure there's going to be stores where you go to and there's like 3 Be'lakors just sitting on the shelf and no one's buying it. Right.
Right.
But whereas then there's 3
Which
people
reminds
over
me,
here
I probably ought to go check my stores.
Who really want that Be'lakor model. So, it is what it is. It's tough, but I hope that this gives them a chance to retool and then come back being able to meet the demand for all these things, because they keep producing stuff we all want to buy. So maybe make enough for us to buy it. That would be the hope.
I mean, I think the biggest loss for me as a consumer is that I would have bought a bunch of the random limited boxes.
Sure.
Because of the FOMO, because of how my own psychographic, I can't, for me, the loss suffered of missing a deal.
Sure.
Is so significant that I will buy and then just resell later. Hence why I have shelves of models. And had I been able to buy, any of the the bundled Broken Realms armies, I probably would have, but almost every store got one of each. And they would just evaporate, or they'd be sold internally, by the store owner to their friends or whatever. And there was just none of these things available. And so I haven't made any model purchases related to Broken Realms, where normally I would be buying at least 1 to 2 boxes per book.
Oh, hey man, I got my Mortavelli's Hellcourt, so I'm happy.
Well, you are lucky because I had requested it and I did not. So
shame for you. I was on that one early. I'm into those flesh eater courts, baby. I'm down. That's where we're gonna go.
Yep.
All right. Cool. What's next?
Okay, we'll talk about the other story item.
Yeah, man.
Go ahead, Vince.
You know where we're going. Well,
The floor is yours.
That's fine. Well, we'll start with this little guy right here. So I'm just going to switch my image up on the screen. We got a new article. And in that new article, they had this little image right at the top of the screen. And if YouTube are watching live, you'll see it pop up on your screen in just a second. But it was the banner header to the article. So before we get into the big news of the article, we had a little picture of Kragnos here. We finally get to see what Kragnos looks like. There he is. There's his face. So he's a destruction monster. He's not a Ryan. He's not a Kurnothi guy. He's not a Beast of Chaos guy. He's a destruction monster. So that's his face. There you go. He looks a lot more rough and tumble than he did when we just saw the little art image of him in the thing. So I thought that was cool. What are you guys excited for Kragnos, our big destruction god beast monster guy?
Yeah, it looks like some sort of sick druid. Not really. It's not really. It's not really from Tom.
I don't know.
Really.
I refuse to fill this image with all of my hopes and dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
I don't know what to expect, and I'm not going to make things up because they're probably not going to have enough models for everybody anyway.
Probably using the cursed sprues.
Yeah, indeed. It's somebody said, but is he? I assume you said, but is he is he a big destruction god beast monster? Yes. As I've said before, you can either agree with me or find out you're wrong. Those are your choices, so that's fine. Whatever you like. You're free to choose your own path here. I am very excited about this, dude. I'm excited. Let me tell you why I love the concept of Kragnos. And JP, I want your take on this. I love that we got a book that was just like some new guy that we hadn't heard of before. That's a totally new character. I want some new big movers and shakers doing cool stuff in the world. Like, I don't mind Marathi and Be'lakor and that stuff. That's all cool. Those are classic characters that we've got emotional attachment to. But I like also mixing in this new stuff. Like, I want some new people rolling around, tearing up the world, doing some things. Not just not just people from the world that was. What's your take? What's your feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's I mean, people complain about everything on the internet, but I know people I've seen a bunch of complaints about the lore in Age of Sigmar at various times, and I think sometimes when the main purpose of the sort of medium is for us to play games in, right? I think that sometimes what you need is the lore to just sort of become big enough and go on long enough that it gets compacted down to where only the good bits survive. And I think just adding this new stuff. And bring it in again. I think you add the Marathi stuff, and that's all cool. You add this new stuff, and you sort of just set one layer in the strata where people can be like, "Oh yeah, you remember when this happened?" And okay, maybe it comes out, and everyone's like, "Oh, I hated the story." Kragnos is relevant for whatever my faction is for whatever reason. I didn't like it, and you're like, fine. But then as time goes on, that he's just a permanent layer in the story, and I think just having more of that and getting understanding more about what the mortal realms actually are and that stuff is cool.
Exactly. I think you put it perfectly. I want that strata because it's the point. There's always new people coming in, and there is these marks we look at, like, oh, you remember when Glocken was introduced or something like that, right? In the end times or whatever your point happens to be in that, right? It gets built up over time. People who have a lot of love of Gardas, who just got his own model, right? Who's clearly like a Stormcast character. That's a previous strata introduced in the history of AOS, right?
Yeah.
So you can have cool stuff happen with Neferata and Manfred and people like that. That's great. I don't hate that at all. Neat. Those are great classic characters that are cool and interesting. Like I said, I'm back on the Manfred train after the last story. He's cool again. Best Mortark. So there you go. But you can also then introduce these new people. And I think you're exactly right. It just keeps building, right? That's how we get to that cool layer. All these characters were introduced at some point in time. They didn't just always exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this says to me, though, is that the kind of the winds of change that we were sensing with regard to the waning of death and the ascendancy of destruction is accurate. And I think that he is going to be the harbinger of the wave of destruction that will move front and center, probably moving into the new edition. And actually, if you look at the majority of the new big armies during this edition, most of them have been death related. Not all of them. Like we've had Lumineth and stuff like that, but like Nighthawk got blown out to an entire range, an entire army book, and OBR, and now we're about to get vampires.
Sure.
Like, so 3 of the biggest armies were all death related. Where like a lot of like Chaos armies got updates, but we really didn't get any new armies in 2nd edition AOS. And so like the new content seemingly focused on for this season has been focusing on flushing out unintended death. And so I suspect that we'll probably see something similar with Destruction. We'll have more than 3 armies in the new edition.
I'm excited. I'm very excited. But of course, this little banner here, he belongs to an actual article that revealed something. Boom! Oh my god! Greatest Monday reveal ever! Ever! This is amazing. I'm wearing the pin again, boys. It's back on. That's right. I am excited about Slaanesh. Here it is. We're back. We're back in this. I was waiting. You know, I was like, I'm starting to feel kind of bad about this army. And then I try to get out. They release this. They pull me right back in. 1000%. The Dark Princess, just such a perfect temptress. This thing is incredible. So this is the form that one of the 2 forms that the progeny took. The little Slaanesh piece that got out into the world in Marathi is going to take this. It took this form, so it took the form of the twins, this one and the peacock. So, which is the talon and the voice. One is a caster, one is a melee. Love it. Beyond excited for this. These are the greatest models I've ever seen in my life. There is no other model that GW has ever produced that even comes close to the 2 of these. They are simply perfection given model form. If you rank any model above this, you're wrong. The only thing that even comes close is the first Keeper of Secrets. But this is simply the best. You're lucky that I don't go into a David from Schitt's Creek entire song of just singing simply the best here. So it's amazing. I love it. It's wonderful. All right. What would you guys like to add on this incredible model?
It's no Gobbapalooza, is it?
Get out of here. Get off. That's fine.
No, I mean, it's awesome. I really like it.
They did say that this will be a dual kit, by the way, that it'll be like it's one kit you build as either.
Yeah.
I love that you love this model.
Uh-huh.
And you're getting things that you like.
Yeah. Yes.
It is a truly stunning model.
Also true.
I don't want to take that away. In fact, like I feel confident to say like it's the best model we've seen released in the last year at least, if not ever.
Year, decade, century, millennia, all of time and space, the history of this universe and all universes. Sure, whatever you like.
Sure. But
I'm ready. Here we go.
So what you all don't know, the rest of our viewers and even JP, is that Vince and I went around when this was released for like an hour of shouting at each other in a messaging chat where some of the other content producers just got to sit by silently and watch as we argued vociferously.
Sure.
And my simple acknowledgement is I love this model. I love that people are happy about it. I love that people are excited about it. But there are some people who are disappointed because this model was not included in the Slaanesh release.
Yep.
And so they feel like their book is incomplete.
Sure.
And they feel like things like War Scroll cards and stuff like that, like they don't have the whole army. Mm-hmm. It's been pieced out or separated. And with these being so close, there's a degree of disappointment there.
Sure.
And you know
no
what?
one except you actually cares about War Scroll cards, but I agree with the rest of your point.
I do. And I know you disagree with me.
I'm just saying I'm agreeing with your broader point. I'm just saying you're literally the only human being that cares about War Scroll cards. But go ahead.
If you care about War Scroll cards, put it mention so in the chat, in the comments below, and on Vince's Twitter feed.
Sure, you can hit me up.
And so I use War Scroll cards as kind of the foundation because I can't trust my phone to be charged for an entire event. And so like
and also
they
he
are,
doesn't
and
have a
they're
printer, so there's, I mean, it's just problems everywhere. It's never-
no, I'm not going to carry loose leaf stuff. Books are heavy. No,
all good.
like War Scroll cards are the way that I keep track of that stuff, just for referencing. And I know that other people have a similar sentiment. So I say that to say I also understand their disappointment. You know, having just watched this happen with Lumineth, right, where we had a Lumineth book drop, and then 6 months later.
Sure.
You know, and the degree, by the way, for Lumineth is much larger than what this is. Like, I'm not saying that they are identical. What I'm saying is they are in the same spectrum. Where what happened with the Lumineth is dramatically of more significance than what happened here. But I just wish we would move away from that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's all I would say.
You have allies in the chat, Tom. You'll be happy to know. But there you go.
Here, can I just say as an aside, GW, see me over on camera too.
Sure.
You know a really easy middle way solution to this? I know this seems like super inconsequential. Is when we do one-off releases like this. This sounds ridiculous. Just put the War Scrolls in the box.
You mean other than what they already do? Because it does come in the box.
They do put the War Scrolls in the box.
Like the War Scroll is printed in the box.
It's printed in the booklet, but it's not a War Scroll card.
Yeah, so you want it on a physical separate card. You're not happy with it in the book.
I want it to be just like the rest of my army, right? Mm-hmm. Just like my endless spells and all that stuff. Like we have this technology that we use regularly, right? Like when they release army boxes, they put War Scroll cards in the army boxes. It's a really low bar. I'm not saying you do this with every unit, but whenever you have units that release that are separate from the main unit, throw people a bone and put the card in the box.
Sure.
It's not gonna stop all the complainers, and I get that. But it's a nice like middle ground thing to acknowledge that, hey, this was released outside of like Battle Tome renewal during the normal cycle, and just to acknowledge that, like, because now anybody that wants a War Scroll card for that has to literally either make their own or wait like 5 years or 6 months when they release a new.
Sure, if they want them to all be the same, like the options are, they can go get the free War Scroll and print it. They can slice the thing out of the book that it comes in and include it in there, or they can make their own in any of 50 different ways. Yes. But if they don't
you're
like,
out of your mind.
If they don't like any of those, which is fine, okay? I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm just saying they're not without workarounds, as imperfect as they may be.
But if you think that that War Scroll is going to fit on a half page, right?
I don't know what it's going to fit on.
No, it's not. Let me tell you, it's not.
I hope not.
And so, like, just like cutting it out of the book isn't going to help because you're going to have a full sheet of paper and then a bunch of small War Scroll cards.
Sure.
That's what I'm saying.
If you don't get all your War Scrolls tattooed on your body like Prison Break, I think you're a casual player and should be removed from the conversation.
100% agreed with JP. JP finally spitting truth.
No, I mean, now, here's the flip side of this. The reality is, any army that I play, I have almost everything memorized anyways, but I just like to be able to look and reference if I need to hand something to the other players.
That's fine.
Just make an educated guess. You've probably hit on threes.
Okay.
Probably neg one Ren.
So I don't want to belabor this point into the ground, but yeah, that's fine. My statement on the feelings around this Slanesh bottle would be summarized as something like the following, so that we don't have to drag this out for another hour of discussion on what I think is probably an uninteresting topic. But I would simply say this. I have no concern about how close they release something to the actual tome that comes out. If it is minimal in what it is, I would prefer that they didn't. I would have preferred this to be in the book and come out at the same time. It was probably more screwed up because of the delays versus when like Kragnos was supposed to come out versus the book and yada yada yada. We all know that.
There was
So-
probably a 6 to 8 month gap.
Yeah, it was supposed to be much longer. That's fine. It wasn't, and so that makes it especially painful. I don't personally care. I want new toys for this thing I love. If you're into Slaanesh, you're into Excess. Give me more. I want Slaanesh models coming out with Kragnos. I want Soulblight Gravelords to release with a new Slaanesh model. I want AOS 3 to release with new Slaanesh models. I want everything. I want it all. Okay? Now, that being said, I understand that I am a strong devotee of Slaanesh and all of its excessive requirements in this way. And I get not everybody's in my camp. So I agree with you, folks, that it's a shame it wasn't in that book, and I understand. But my point would be, let us not lose the forest for the trees. This is a very gorgeous model that hopefully doesn't have bad rules. Fingers crossed! Okay? And we don't know what else is in the book for Slaanesh. It could be just this model. It could be
You don't
more.
think they're going to suck you right in and then let you down again?
It's entirely possible, and that would be very Slaanesh-y too. And that's perfectly fine. But my point is, I don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good. Was this a perfect release? No, absolutely not. Could we have communicated it better, said this is coming, put it in the book, done any of several things?
Yeah.
Yes, and they should have, and I agree with all of that. But none of that spoils the release for me. I would still rather live in the world where I have this model. The joy that I felt, and that I have to believe others felt. Maybe I can't be the only person that's this intense about Slaanesh. I kept this page open for the last 3 days of that article. Like, it was just a tab that was open. And I would this is not a joke. And I would just randomly, if I was frustrated or feeling anything that wasn't a happy emotion, I would just scroll to it. And I would just be like, oh man, that is so beautiful. And I'd look at more details and stare at it more because I'm so excited about it. Right?
GW, send this man 2 kits so you can pre-paint them.
Like, this made my whole day. I was just like, I started out my Monday just like any normal Monday, and then I saw this, and it changed the trajectory of my week. Okay? Like, that's real. That's not me being, like, this is not hyperbole at this point. This is real, right? This is because this is a thing I'm passionate about and I love, and I was really excited. And that's what these models can do for people, and so I just don't want to lose that in the rage, right? It's cool to have complaints. I have no issue with that.
Well, and I don't think any of us have rage. Like, I'm not raging. I was raging at you before because you were being an ass. Because you were being we're in prime time. Because you were being you. But what I will say is that I'm not mad about this release. Again, I'm really excited. I think it's probably the most beautiful model that they've ever released, period.
Yeah.
Like, the lines are just stunning.
It's gorgeous. I love both versions. We've had this girl up for a little while. Let's go to the other girl. Yeah, they're so good. Anyways, there we go. That's the thing. Okay, now that I haven't lost all of you, I probably lost like 10 people just sitting there rambling on about this freaking thing. Very excited about it. As stated on the pin, I am excited about Slaanesh. So there we go. Okay, cool. Great week in the Vince household. Okay, cool. Anything else? Was that our last news item?
Yep.
I figured.
Also, we know that now that the Witch Hunters and Croak are going to be in Kragnos.
Yes, they did. Thank you. Yes,
Which,
they did also
guess
confirm.
what? Newsflash, probably not going to be enough models.
Let's hope.
So, hey, maybe that's one way to thin out Croak and Seraphon.
No, I'm very excited about New Croak. I love New Croak. New Croak is great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Pour rules onto him and make him 600 points, and I'm going to be thrilled.
Right, but only half the Seraphon players will actually be able to have him. So that'll just
they'll just use
thin out the actual
old Croak
put him on like 100 mil base.
Yeah,
easy. What's going to happen?
Easy. Yeah. Take him off his palanquin. Just leave him as a little mummy frog in the middle of.
Do you know how many old Bellicors we're gonna have on the big Bellicor base? Yeah.
I know mine's gonna be.
Sure. So that's fine. All right.
I'm just gonna put him on a tower for the Dreadfort.
Sure.
He'll be up on the parapet, like pointing with his sword out, and then because that's the footprint of that 100 mil or 120 that they'll probably put it on.
He just looks smaller because he's further away.
Yeah, exactly. He's really high up.
Yeah. Give Croak 150 points of rules and mark him up to 600 points, and then we've got a good balance. That fixes that problem. There we go. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to some pick of the week, gentlemen. All right. Pick o' the week. JP, what would you like to share with everybody? What would you like to point everybody toward?
What is the pick of the week?
Oh, I didn't prep you on this. I'm sorry. I normally tell people. Is there any media, video, or something like that, or an article, or maybe a thing? Like maybe there's this website where people could go and put their lists that you might like. Anything out there in the world you want to boost the signal on that you would like to direct people toward, JP?
Yeah. All right. Thanks for helping me with my shameless plug. So for anyone who wants to check out, we're going to cover some of this, a bunch of stats about Age of Sigmar. You can check out listbot.co.uk. We're going to be getting into it, but as a bunch of stats for the meta, a bunch of lists you can look at as an analyzer that works however well you believe it does in telling you how good your list is. It's pretty fun. I even used it myself the other day when I went and talked about Flesh Eater Courts. I was like, I want to see what people are playing on in Flesh Eater Courts now, and I could sort of scroll through recent lists. So yeah, that's going to be my pick of the week.
That's a perfectly valid pick and awesome. It will be linked down in the description. Tom, what do you got for everybody?
So I tweeted out a tweet today from Amanesis Studio, which is like this stunning, just truly stunning. I think it's the Daughters of Cain mirror.
Yeah.
From the Bloodrack Shrine that they painted to be like the portal to the like realm between realms where Slash is being held, to basically be a duplicate of that paint job of that very famous painting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a stunning thing. And he has a blog. He is a painter, a self-taught painter from Switzerland. And so we'll have the link to his blog below, where he's just kind of detailing his own journeys and stuff like that. And just he's kind of showing how he does things and walks through like painting tutorial steps and processes and stuff like that. And it's fantastic. So I'm going to encourage you to check it out.
It was awesome. Absolutely. Did enjoy that. That mirror is a great piece. It's a great, it's just a great thing for that kind of painting and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm all about it. That was very well done. Very much dig your selection there. Solid. Okay. So for my pick of the week, well, of course we've got to go to our friend 2+ Tough, who is once again reading the book so you don't have to. So if you're...
Let me just say, I love his series because I don't have to read lore books anymore.
He does the work so you don't have to. Yes. So Doug is in the middle of his lore series around Bellicor. It's freaking great. He's 3 videos in as of today, so it's a 5-video series. He's 3 videos in as of today. Would recommend highly. I will link video number 1, which came out Monday in that series. It should just autoplay you through the whole list. So if you want to wait till Friday, there you go. You can just do the whole story back to back if you want. But Doug does an amazing job of breaking it down. So absolutely great stuff. Would recommend 10 out of 10. Well done, Doug, as always. Okay. Cool. Now let's talk about some hobby time. All right, so hobby time. So JP, what have you been working on, man? You been painting anything? Anything on your desk? What have you been doing with ListBot? That'll count as hobby. Whatever you do.
Yeah,
what does your hobby consist of right now? Coding?
Yeah, no. It is 50-50, like desperately trying to, make the ListBot website stop crashing and have some semblance of UI and UX, but that is less interesting and less fun than. Yeah, I've been working on a Gloomspite Gits list, so it's got a bit of everything. I got some Trogs, I got some Spider, I got some Grots, I've got a Mega Gargan in there, all converted up to look like an even larger Trog. So I've had, because there's been obviously so much time, it's been nice to sort of get on a hobby project that I was like, this is like, I have a full amount of time to sort of keep doing this. And even like for painting the grots, I'm batch painting them in batches of like 5 instead of batch painting them in batches of 60. or something, you know? So it's like you actually get to enjoy, like, okay, I can paint there. You gotta highlight all the noses on the grots because I don't have to do them in the next week before the event. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. And it's just, they're an awesome range. All the Gloomspike Git stuff is just so cool and so fun. Like you can do like whatever you want with it. So yeah, been super enjoying that.
Yeah, they're so fun. It's such a great range. I agree. So that's awesome. And I love giant Trog. I saw somebody turn one of the giants into a giant orc, which I also appreciate because many times on the show we talked about how I think the ultimate, like, orcs just keep growing, keep fighting.
Yeah.
And so I think we need a giant sized orc. Like that would be a great release for them. Would just be a Mega Gargan sized orc that just kept growing because he kept fighting and winning. So yeah, Tom, what about you, buddy? What's your hobby time been?
Well,
Besides opening magic cards.
I mean, a new set did drop this week.
Yeah,
so I'm not gonna lie, but I put together a pillar.
That's something.
Nice.
You did something. Is
I'm
there a
in
purpose
this
to this pillar? Is it a base for something? Are you gonna put something flying on top of it?
No, I just like to build terrain. Like, I'm not gonna lie. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna build a pillar.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm gonna do with this. So I really like the GW's, like the temple kit, like the Sigmar temple stuff. And I have a bunch of boxes of it that I just every once in a while I'll grab and I'm like, you know what? I'm putting together this wall.
Okay.
This is what's happening here.
Perfectly
The last
fine.
thing I built from my gifts was actually a pillar. I got some of those like cake
Yeah.
wedding topper pillars.
Yep.
Smash it in half with a hammer, and then you're just sort of painting it so it looks like it's old.
Spread it around. Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, I have a bunch of those up there on my shelf.
Yeah, perfect.
So,
yeah,
it's good.
Shout
Yeah,
out to
the wedding cake
pillars of
terrain
the
is a
community.
classic. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean it was terrible. I just said shout out to the pillars of the community.
Oh, darn it! I over talked your pun. Oh, that was such a good pun. Okay. Fantastic. For myself, I haven't gotten a break into Curse City yet because just yesterday I finished up finally this big monstrosity. Mine is a little different, as you can see. We're going for a slightly different take on our main hero here. So we have a big giant. Oh yeah, there you go. Is that for Anthony?
Yeah, Anthony sent me a terrain piece for my tech list that I had asked about.
Sure.
And so I wanted to put it back on camera for him just so he saw that it exists. So
Nice. So yeah, I finished up this guy. I'll put out some pictures this weekend. My bull god is a slightly different, bringing a slightly different energy than Glutos. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see him there. Oops, there you go. See, nice little bull god.
Oh yeah.
He's just kind of floating up there. And we've got all his little people. I actually didn't use the little guy, partially because he doesn't have any direct rules, but also partially because I have a different plan for him and want to use him in a separate project. So
why did you not do the canopy and you did the mirror instead?
Because I wanted him floating up there in the sort of like I am a golden god pose instead of instead of lounging.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah. So, and I too love that mirror. And I've used it like many times. I have that mirror all over my Slaanesh stuff because I got like 10 copies or 15 copies of that mirror a while back, and so I've got that thing everywhere. There you go. Yes, I will put out pictures this weekend. I just need to actually make time to take pictures.
Oh, Bits World, we miss you.
Yeah, indeed, don't we? Press F's in chat. Anyways, so okay. Yes, the little guy. Yes, the Slaaneshi halfling master chef. Yes, I want to do something different with him. So there you go. I love that little dude. I want to put him to use in a slightly different subject. So, all right. Anyways, gentlemen, are we ready to get to the main subject? Are you ready to talk about skill against skill in Age of Sigmar?
Skill against Seraphon.
There you go. Okay. So we're going to I need to switch our view here because we're going to go for a slightly different view today. We're going to go for the whole presentation, which means I am going to bring up the Prezzo, but because it will be hard to read in only half, we're going to actually go full screen. Then we're going to go ahead and hide that. And then we're going to go ahead and put that into presentation mode. Be in presentation mode, and then I have to switch this. My goodness.
Computers, not even once.
There you go. Yeah, indeed. Okay. So, gentlemen, this will be covering us for now, but that's all right. So, let's talk about Age of Sigmar stats, skill, and everything else. And what does it mean? Can armies be too good? All this kind of stuff. What does skill matter? JP, I'm so excited about this. So before we start, we're just, like, this is my fun image. We're just gonna talk about stonks. We talk about this stuff a lot. We got our Skaven here. Philosophically, I think that there is a constant conversation that we have around armies that are too good or armies that are too bad. Certainly, I think about the game often like that. We think about armies being out of bounds.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into the deets, JP, I want to start with you. How do you think about army quality defined, like power levels? What's your sort of 40,000 foot view take on that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, right? And obviously, this is why we're going to be talking about it. It's a hard question, right? You get a book, and the power of that book is essentially going to be some function of the power of the book and the power of the players that play it, right? And then also in that mix is going to be the lists that come out of that book, which are, obviously very related to the book itself, but slightly separate. There have been, people will often talk about, we'll get into this later, but, people will often talk about, that whether there's the internal balance and the external balance and, all those different lists. But I think essentially when when the thing I often want to look about that I think maybe we forget as war gamers is I like to also think about how fun the book is, both to play and how fun it is as a thing to exist in the game. I often don't like to talk about how fun an army is to play against, because I think sometimes it's sort of like, well, playing against an army is watching them try and ruin your, 2-hour slot, right? They're trying to beat you. But I think that an army can be fun, like, to think about, and that it exists. Maybe you don't like playing against Bellicor, makes sense, but you can still think he's a cool part of the gaming landscape.
Right.
So my view overall is like there are power differentials between the books, no doubt about that. The actual power of a book is very hard to observe because there's this magnification effect of good players playing good books more often, and that you're sort of also lumping into that when we're looking at this stuff. What are the sort of lists that people can play? Are there a bunch of different ones? Is there internal balance? Is it fun? And is it cool to have in Age of Sigmar?
Yeah, exactly. Just to really put a fine point on that, it's not as though we can measure the power of a book like you can measure atomic weight or something, right? Where we can perform some kind of scientific experiment and go, yes, this is exactly this atomic weight, hence we know blah, 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 these facts, right? That's just not what actually is going on here. We're trying to sort of back into it to a point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From the emergent data of how players are using it, the games they're playing, the tournaments we have available, the scenarios those use, the terrain setup of their boards, the overall meta, what other armies are out there, what armies were at that event. Like, there's a lot of variables that we're trying to just kind of back into power, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say it's impossible or it's wrong or we just have to throw our hands up. It's just to say it's a very complicated picture.
Yeah, it's dirty. It's dirty. You have to sort of perform this complicated photosynthesis, as you say, of like just 12 million inputs coming in, and then you're sort of like, well, judging from what I've looked at, and also from in general, we have a reasonable grasp as a community. People are like, oh, this feels very strong and stuff like this, which is not necessarily always completely right, but good data to have. And yeah, as you say, you're just sort of trying to extricate back out of that. And this sort of, I find it very interesting, is I'm like perpetually trying to figure out like what is the closest we can get to that atomic weight. Like can we, like, how do we extricate the fact if we know how good this player is and we know how well they do with these two different books, can we sort of figure out, try and fill in those missing gaps? As you say, there's a million variables going on, and it's hard to do, and it's definitely something that I'm still working on.
Yep. Tom, what about you? How do you think about this landscape, as it were?
I mean, I think that there are certainly Like there are certainly power differentials in armies often, but it's funny, like oftentimes though, it's not like the raw muscle of a book that we're talking about. Oftentimes what we're actually talking about is we're talking about the amount of tools that are available in that army.
Sure.
And I think that that is going to be a relevant part of the conversation, right? When we talk about what we're actually seeing in the data. Because for me, most of the time when I talk about armies being good or bad, what I end up talking about is my frustration is about the lack of tools in a list.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can I just make a point on top of that real fast?
Sure.
That we as a community, and I am including myself in this 100%, I think your point is so well founded, Tom, because we as a community viscerally react to the things that are blunt instrument power and tend to give things that are toolbox power a pass because it requires, because toolbox power has a skill floor that blunt force power doesn't. Let me see if I can make this real for everybody, what I'm trying to draw a distinction between. When FEC and Slaanesh launched, those were the original Slaanesh, not current Slaanesh. Those were some of the most blunt force power tools we had seen introduced into the game ever. Right? You could basically show up sight unseen, pilot FEC and Gristlegore, and smash your way through most players.
Yeah, good.
Right? By the way,
serves them right.
Yeah, there you go. For those who don't know, JP is a big FEC stan. If you want to watch more about that, you can go check out JP. You just did a show with AOS Coach talking about FEC. I watched it. It was great. You should all go check that out too. I'll link that just because it was a really fun show. And as I'm jumping on the FEC train, I watched it. I was like, okay, I got to learn. I got to study. Anyways, so those are blunt force tools. My point is they provoke immediate visceral reactions, right? We were all like, ugh. Yeah? Like, there's sort of this immediate, like, boo that we all have about it. But much more complicated sort of toolbox power is much harder to get. Even if it's dominant, it's harder to elicit that same reaction, right? It takes time. Yeah?
Right.
I think also it's important, obviously you need both, right? You need tools and you also do need some output. And I think one thing that people can often as a community, again, is only picking one or the other, right? Like the new Fox Lumineth man who flies around and he goes like 12 million inches. He moves in both phases. In the whole discussion, I never saw anyone, lots of people saying they love him, lots of people saying they absolutely hate him, people legitimately saying they're quitting the game because he exists. Never saw anyone talk about how much damage he did for how many points he is.
Right.
Which at some point you do have to do. And I think there is just often cases of people just ending up a little bit too caught up in either one of those things, and it's not like the idea logic is not idiotic, like it's not just complete, people aren't thinking about these things in totally wrong ways. It's just, especially now when it's hard to hit the tables, like you need both of those things. And I think what we tend to see in the top armies are armies that get one or the other of those things almost for free. So you look at like Flesh Eater Corps, Gristlegore, and you're like, they have so much, still rocking some of the highest damage sort of pounds per square inch of any army in the game on the Terrorgeist, right?
Yep.
And you're like, whoa, that's crazy. And then when they have stuff like, okay, they can summon, 20 free ghouls from a board edge, right, to take an objective, you're like, that rule is not crazy good. But when you're sort of throwing it on top of, well, we already absolutely excel in this blunt trauma section, it's like, those things start to compound. So I think, if you have loads and loads of tools, like if you're a Be'lakor Kairos sort of list, and you have all those tools, and then you sit there and you're like, oh yeah, and also Kairos can do 6 mortal wounds a turn anywhere on the board through the portal. You're like, that's really good, like on top of the tools. But as you say, also it is obviously harder to operate a tools heavy list than if Iron Jaws
were blunt force trauma list, right? Where like,
exactly,
I know I can. That was part of the thing with Old Slaanesh. You could just like push in and be like, come get me. It doesn't matter. Like I've got your number regardless. Okay, cool. So let's start getting into some deets. Let's spill some tea. Here we go. All right. First off, I want to just sort of ground level set. So I want to talk about ListBot AI, the data set, kind of how you think about this, because this data set and what we're using here is going to lay a lot of groundwork going forward. So I thought this would be a good chance. JP, I'm just going to let you opine. This is a random Slanesh list that I made and put into ListBot so people could kind of see how it works. And I got a B minus. Good stuff. Not bad for Slanesh. So at any rate, yeah, tell us about like ListBot and the data set we're going to work with for the rest of this of this data exploration and so on, and how you think about this as a whole.
So again, for the people who've never heard of it, ListBot is essentially this colloquial term now for a bunch of different sort of statistical views of Age of Sigmar. So we can start with the list analyzer bot. It's reasonably well contained, where basically, as we can sort of see, ListBot takes a list and it breaks it down into sort of these components. Some of them are fairly straightforward. We'll skip the first one for now, but we've got like effective wounds. That's just the amount of wounds you have, basically buffered up by how high your saves are. So if you have a 2+ save, 10 wounds is worth more than if you have a 6+ save. It takes more damage to kill you. Then we got like, how many castle and binds you got, shooting damage, overall damage, how many bodies you get, how fast you are, and how your faction's doing in the meta. That's all fairly straightforward. Maybe the most interesting, not necessarily the most important, is the sort of ListBot points value, where basically I just took all the war scrolls in Age of Sigmar and with their points, I fed them into a machine learning algorithm and just trained it to say, okay, what do war scrolls look like? What do you think about war scrolls? And then I can take a new war scroll and say, okay, given that you've seen all the other war scrolls in Age of Sigmar, how many points do you think this is worth? Right. And so if ListBot thinks it's worth way more points than it actually costs, you're like, oh, maybe that's a really good unit. If ListBot thinks it's way less, then maybe it's a bad unit. And it's sort of, as we've seen over time, the community's helped me a lot with it. Like, it gets things kind of right. It has some fun insights, basically. Some stuff it gets great. I think its favorite unit in the game, maybe not anymore, but was Gobapalooza. It just did not understand. It was like, well, there's multiple wizards and they all have so many wounds and they all have so many rules. It was just like, I think they're worth like 1,800 points. And you're like, not so much. Or Marathi, it always thought was worth way less because it couldn't understand like what taking 3 wounds a turn only really means. That rule doesn't exist. It's not easy to codify. But yeah, then it basically, so it uses all those factors and it just compares you to lots of other lists and gives you this score. So you're just sort of scored based on where you fall percentile wise. And it's slightly cut out of the picture here, but it also throws out a precedence score, which is basically just saying, look, maybe ListBot thinks your list is terrible, but a bunch of people are playing lists like yours and doing well at tournaments. So it's sort of like a safety catch of like, if ListBot is telling you this is the best list in the world, Darren Watson loves to break ListBot, and he's like, all I do is put in Ungors of Slanesh, and now I've got an S+++ list. And it's like underneath the precedent, it's like this list is probably not very good. I've never seen anyone do well with this list, so be aware.
Right. So yeah, it's important to just to break this down for everybody real quick. So for those who haven't used ListBot, and you should check it out. Again, it's so funny, JP, because you and I started having a conversation about it in one of the WhatsApp chats, and at that time I did not realize you were the creator of it. Like when we first started talking, and we were just talking about AI and you know the kind of strategies we would use. I did not realize that you were the person behind it.
I've had a couple conversations like that. They're always fun.
And then very quickly I realized who we were. I was like, oh, well, we got to do this as a show. That's what we came to pretty fast, right? Because there was just so much there we wanted to talk about. And I think the point here is it's not the point isn't that like ListBot can craft by getting its score and have this exact, again, precise atomic weight, right? It's that it can understand directionally the elements where you might be over or underperforming what it sees as the AOS average, how you're kind of comparing. And then importantly, and I think this is the part, like, again, it's cut off here because I can only fit so much on the slide, right? But as you scroll down the page, it's going to show you like other lists that contain units like yours and how they've been doing and where they succeed. So you can then get an idea on, oh, that's neat. Maybe if I tweak my list like this, or, oh, that's cool. They included this and this instead of this thing that I have, or whatever, right? It becomes a really great tool especially if you're someone who doesn't love list building. This is my honest answer.
Yeah,
If you're someone
yeah.
who
Right.
doesn't love list building, who doesn't like to be like Tom and just sit there and grind 1,000 versions of the same list, make a list that kind of interests you, put it into ListBot, get like a bunch of recommendations of people who are close, and just go and pick the one you like and go, oh yeah, okay, that's close enough to what I want,
Yeah.
but seemed to perform really well. Great, I got my list. Ta-da!
I love-
And also for me, one of the things as well was what I would find is I'd be like, okay, I want to play a new faction. And I'd be like, the amount of lists I know for this faction are one, right? I know the one list that everybody talks about that does well at tournaments, and I know nothing else. Like, if I don't want to play that list, I don't even know where to start. And I was sort of like, I just want a resource where I can sort of scroll through lots of lists. And then I can see, okay, look, nobody plays, Ungors of Slanesh, except for Darren Watson. You're like, or, everybody seems to take, Dreadblade Hera in
Right.
Nighthawk. Right. And you're like, okay, so no matter what list I'm building, I should probably, I don't have to take it, but I should probably look at what the Dreadblade Hero does. And it just gives you a little direction, especially if you like, say you're playing Cities of Sigmar or, Legions of Nagash, something like that, where you do have a lot of these war scrolls. It can be useful to just sit there and say, well, I know I want to play my Vampire Lord on a zombie dragon, but can you show me all the lists that have that in? And you're like, oh, okay. You can get your ideas. Or as you say, you could just do the opposite. You can just be like, what's the list that most recently has done well at a tournament? Oh, it's this list? I'll just play that. I'll play that and see what it's like. I'll change it if it doesn't work or if I don't like it.
Right. It's such a powerful tool for those who aren't interested in like just grinding lists to find units that are interesting, that are being used or are used in different ways, to find different kinds of lists. Like that to me is such the great part of this tool, right? It's that sort of like, it really does, especially for if you're not as into all of it, it lets you really understand kind of what's in different lists and helps you understand why. Right?
Yeah. And you can, like, again, just get to that experience. And also, and I love linking it in the WhatsApp chat when this comes up, but people are often like, okay, I've got my list. I don't know what spells to take. And there's a tab on there for loadout analysis. And it just says, it's like, look, most people are taking Spectral Host as the spell on their Terror guys, And again, it gets you over some of the initial friction of starting a new army, as you say, where you're like, okay, I know the models, I know what I want to play, but I don't want to read through 3 pages of artifacts when everybody only plays one.
Right.
I don't want to necessarily like look at all these spells and figure out whether I'd rather have Run in Charge or operate at full wounds on both of my. It sort of just gives you a starting point where you can get your list on the table and play. While when you go home, maybe you still read through all the other spells, all the other artifacts, and you're like, oh, I do want to play that. But you can get sort of to the table immediately by just being like, okay, I'm gonna take the most popular spells and artifacts for everything. And that at least I haven't sort of missed something obvious or picked a trap or something like that.
Yep. All right. So the other thing I wanted to touch on, well, real quick before we go into that, Tom, any thoughts you wanted to add there? I didn't want to cut you out. Okay. Cool. Then let's talk about the data set a little, because you're obviously drawing on it on an underlying data set here.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about kind of what the data set is composed of and stuff like that? That way people have that grounding when we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the data set is, the main chunk of it is any games recorded on, what's TTO stand for? Tabletop.to. Is that literally what it is? Yeah. So basically, it's just an online tournament running website. Also, I've got some data from the Australian rankings and the English Bad Dice rankings. And I basically just take all this recorded tournament data and just, slap it all into a database. So, what's sort of cool that's happened over time, almost I think since, during the time that I've started it, is we really used to only have we'd say, all right, this is the faction someone has played, and this is where they finished at the tournament. This guy came third with Slanesh, and you're like, I don't know what he played. I don't know who he played against, any of that. But now over time, just as sort of, AOS has gone, or just wargaming in general has gone more popular, more sophisticated tools like tabletop.to, we have this data of like, here are the lists people played, here's each round they played. And that allows us to make some sort of more nuanced inferences about like, okay, well, if this faction is always going 4-1, are they dropping that game 5 or game 1? What you can move past stats like win rate and just stuff like that, and you can get a little bit more nuance to it.
Right.
So again, the sort of the long and the short of it is the data is any recorded tournaments all around the world that I can get my hands on.
Very good. All right, awesome. Okay, so and yes, I think the key here is it can help you understand some of the. I like this little visualization here because it's just sort of a nice little visualization for where does your army have strengths versus where does it have weaknesses, right? It's not, even if you're like, you might not want to change, you just know, okay, cool, this is the types of things I'm good at, and that might not be immediately transparent to you, right? Especially if you're just starting with an army, you're like, oh, okay, cool, these are the things that I'm doing well or above average or whatever, right? As the list.
Yeah.
Which I think is good. All right, excellent. Next slide. Let's talk about the landscape. So here I've got a little image. I think this is actually different if you go there now, just because more tournament data has been fed in, but this is as of when we made the presentation or whatever. So there's so much on here. This is sort of the high level, right?
Yeah.
On ListBot, you have more than just ListBot on the ListBot site. You also have all sorts of things like tiering and army information and stuff like that. And there's a couple points that I call out on the screen here that I thought was really fascinating. Like Seraphon has the highest number of event wins by a wide margin. Like a lot. Caradron Overlords represents the largest boost to a player's skill simply by piloting it, which I thought was interesting. So we'll talk about how you backed into that in a little while, because that's a really cool thing. Disciples of Tzeentch has the second highest event wins and has a very high chance to be seen at an event. Like when you look at Disciples, they're popular enough, you have a high chance to face an event, and they have a high win rate, right? Like they're kind of hitting on all cylinders there.
Yeah.
And Gitz, Nighthaunt, and Sylvaneth all represent a material challenge to the player's ability to navigate to a win, is how I have phrased this.
I love it. Love that energy.
Yeah.
And, the other thing that I want to talk about is the chance to face at an event. We've talked about this in previous shows.
Yeah.
Is that, it's not as though people just cluster around what they perceive as the most powerful stuff. People play ultimately what they like, right? Or what they're interested in.
Right. Yep.
And this is another good proof of that. You look at like OBR, Maw Tribes, Cities of Sigmar, Skaven. All of these have more than a 20% chance for you to face at an event because they're relatively popular armies in the meta, despite whatever, like they're all over the shop here on relative tiering or positioning or win rates or whatever, right? So I just think it's fascinating. Anyways, hit me with some thoughts you've got on this, and Tom, I'm going to come to you afterward.
Yep. One of the I think touching on the chance to face an event is a cool one, because it's one of the things I sort of wanted to think about, where it's like about what is going to give you expected value in terms of like list building and stuff like that. Like if we imagine someone says to you, look, we have this tournament that you're going to, and if you win, we'll give you $10 million, a lollipop of your favorite flavor, and whatever else you can imagine, right? And what are you going to bring? And you're like, oh, I'll bring Seraphon, right? You're like, that's probably just the best army. I think that's the best army I'm going to bring. If instead they said, okay, we've gathered, the top 20 players from the whole world, and you're going to an event, what faction do you bring? Then you have a different, then you're like, well, there's a very good chance that I'm going to be playing lots of other Seraphon, right? And so this sort of chance to face, it sort of ties into the fact that the way we play Age of Sigmar isn't to optimize competitive gameplay. We get a random round one, and then you work your way up through the ladder, versus people who've got similar records to you, rather than say like a chess tournament where you play against people seeded at your own skill.
Right.
So I think what that sort of, when I throw this sort of chance to face, is if you're thinking about, and we'll get into the skill stuff later, but if you're thinking about, oh, should I change my list to counter Seraphon, right? It's like, probably not is almost always going to be the answer, because it's like one, and Seraphon's big, right? 35%. So you got like a 1 in 3 chance to face them. And then you got to factor in, we're going to talk about this, what are the chances that game when you play against Seraphon is determined by specifically the stuff you added to your list. It's not determined by the fact that you won all the priority rolls, they won all the priority rolls. It wasn't a super strong Seraphon list. They made a big mistake, you made a big mistake. So it's sort of like, again, if you were going to that World Masters, you could really think about getting extra value out of countering Seraphon. you know. But if you're just going to an all-comers event, you know, you're just like, yeah, okay, I could make my list 20% better against Seraphon, but it's just never really going to be worth it. So sort of that's why I slapped that in there. And again, I just sort of try to put a bunch of stats in here. And then again, self-explanatory. The most relevant one, again, touched on is this player power boost.
Yeah, let's get into this one, because this one's fascinating. And on the site, you do have a more detailed explanation of exactly how that's calculated. So it's not just some opaque thing. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, again, I sort of struggle. I think it's had a couple names because it's hard to exactly quantify. I've got a little blurb of text, but it can be good to explain, where basically what it is we take the subset of players who've played this faction, and you have to have played, like, I think it's like you have to have played 3 factions, and you have to have played at least, you know, some amount of games with each one to qualify as going into this data set. But basically it says, okay, so, well, you know, Ideneth Deepkin will say, okay, you've played 10 games of Ideneth Deepkin, and you've got a 60% win rate with them. And we've looked at your games on all the other factions you've played. You know, you've also played, you know, Stormcast and Flesh Eater Courts, and your win rate is 50%. So what we sort of say from that is like, okay, well, it seems like Deepkin, you know, regardless of how good it is in an absolute sense, it seems like Deepkin makes you about 10% better than you normally are. Obviously, a bunch of different factors could go into that. Maybe you played Stormcast for your first tournament and then swapped to Deepkin, etc. But we average that over everybody who plays the faction, basically. And that's sort of, again, to get into when we're talking about this skill stuff, that was sort of the start of how I'm trying to separate is it good players playing the faction that are making it so good? Because as we say, Seraphon has so many event wins. But as we talked about, if you wanted to go win an event, Seraphon is the army you should bring. So we get that sort of double, that positive reinforcement of like, yeah, well, everyone who wants to win the event as much as they can is probably taking Seraphon. If you're taking Gloomspite Gitz, you know, like I took my Gobblepalooza to an event in Ireland, by definition, my winning is not the most important thing to me. Now, maybe it is, you know, when I get to the table, yeah, I'm trying my best to win. You know, I'm not just sitting there being like, oh, wow, Gobblepalooza is so much fun, I don't care. I'm like trying my best to win all the games. But if I'd been trying my best since list building, I wouldn't have brought Gitz, and I wouldn't have brought Gobblepalooza. So the player power boost is designed to sort of capture that. And you can sort of see, like, Gitz has a negative minus 17%, where it's like, yeah, a lot of people do better on their other factions, and then presumably bring Gloomspite Gitz because they love it, and do worse. Right. Now, again, even that stat, you know, is tainted by the fact that, as I said, when I brought Change Host to an event, I optimized my Change Host to the best I could. Right, I'm not making any friends. And when I brought Gloomspite Gitz, I was like, well, I'm not going to play Gloomspite Gitz and not bring Gobblepalooza. Like what? Like, because I'm already so. There are always going to be these other little compounding factors, but you sort of hope that overall they give you some sort of picture, you know? So that's all it is. You can just see a sort of different, like Daughters of Cain, you know, basically as strong in terms of win rate as these other two armies, but it's only that plus 2% power boost. So it's like most of the people playing Daughters of Cain and doing well were already doing well on other factions. And whereas, you know, Ideneth Deepkin, Seraphon, and I think KO, is the biggest one, people are doing better on KO than they are on the other factions they play.
Right. And it's interesting to watch how that will change over time as more and more data happens. Like, you know, right now, you look at Slaanesh, still looking at it because of the data set that it's pulling right over the past year, and you look at it still at this A rating. Obviously, recent events have not been as favorable for Slaanesh, right? And so it like, I will be interested to it's interesting to watch how this tracks over time, because my expectation would be, because Slaanesh has such a high skill floor, right? And is so sort of complicated and finessey to play, that over time it will have a negative player power boost that sort of creeps into the numbers, because it's almost by necessity this type of army that you can't, that like it's very easy to do worse with. Right. Yeah,
exactly. And I think you see that, especially with Slaanesh, right? And you see it with Sylvaneth, got a minus 23% here. Right. I can imagine similar with Slaanesh, where you played the previous book, and, you know, regardless of how good it was, which was very good, like, you played the previous book and you learned this play style, right?
Right.
Very true with Sylvaneth. I'm sure very true with Slaanesh. And then the new book comes out and you're like, I'm stoked. I'm going to get it all out on the table again. And you're like, wait, with this Slaanesh army, I can't, you know, just charge in and pile in a bunch of times before you get to attack. Or you know, with my Sylvaneth, I can't just cover the whole board in Dryads and Cheese. Like, it's you can sort of see that happening, as you say. And again, it doesn't, you know, you could be very good, you know, an army could actually be very good and still have a negative player power boost.
Yep.
In fact, like you can see Nurgle here are reasonably high up, right? They're sort of the top of B tier, but they have a slightly, and Legion of Grief, in fact, have a slightly negative power boost. And Legion of Grief, I know this because I've played them a lot, are very interesting. Legion of Grief in the top 25% of players has just under a 50% win rate, and in the top 10% of players has an 85% win rate. So Legion of Grief, and again, you know, there's a variety of factors that contribute to that. You know, maybe a bunch of people are just like, I play Nighthaunt, I want to try Legion of Grief or something like that. But it shows like that there are these sort of nooks and crannies that exist in the metagame that are not fully being explored. You know?
Right. Yep. 100%. Tom, what about you? Thoughts?
No, I don't have any thoughts. Keep going.
Okay.
Like skill matters is like I don't want to be flippant, but like it seems like the right answer here is skill matters.
Yeah. So we're building. We got to crafting.
Oh yeah, and maybe as just a brief comment, you can see these numbers are quite small. Like okay, Sylvaneth is big, but even for these top armies, you're like, okay, if you play Deepkin, you might do about 6% better. And in an event with 5 games, that's not even one win. You know, if you're doing 6% better, you've got to be playing, you know, 5 or 6 events before you see one extra win. If my math is right.
Right. Absolutely. Okay.
Oh, and one thing to address about the data set, I'll just say this, is people often ask me, this is sort of it's not a pet peeve, but it's funny. People often ask me, they say, oh, you say that, you know, Seraphon only has a 60% win rate, but you're including people who are playing for fun Seraphon lists, not just the optimized Seraphon lists, right? They're like, look, this includes people who just want to play loads of Carnosaurs. And, you know, but what I'm really just talking about is Croak. And, you know, that's fine as an idea, but I've never had anyone ask me that for the weak factions. You know what I mean? No one's ever said to me, have you taken Beasts of Chaos and removed Adam Mumford playing 16 Cockatoos and nothing else in his list? You know, like no one's ever. So I think just as a note, it's like, yes, this, you know, Seraphon will include the win rate of people playing non-optimized Seraphon, but the worst factions will contain more of those. So if anything, the weak factions are slightly stronger, because if we looked only at optimized Gloomspike Gits, you know, they would have a much higher win rate. You know, there's people who, you know, Richie McCallie had an 85% win rate with Gloomspike Gits over a year. So like, you know, the stuff of the optimal versus suboptimal lists, we basically hope comes out more or less in the wash.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. Yes, it is funny that it's always the top armies that get that treatment, not the lower ones.
Yeah. No one's ever like, was he playing optimized Beasts of Chaos? You're like, well, how am I supposed to know?
Sure, exactly. All right, so power and presence. So what that previous information gave us the ability to do, and what you have here is sort of this quadranting out, right? By both success and sort of number of appearances, which is kind of useful because it lets us think about this in a different way of like not only how good it is, but how often do we see it and that kind of thing. And again, we can have discussions about how these things move or what presence means or stuff like that. For example, like Daughters of Cain right now, when you pulled this data, was still in the powerful and rare category. I'm not sure that will remain true. Right, because it, you know, it's got a new look. It's coming back in a big way. People are probably, we know a lot of people moved away from the faction because they were playing it. And we saw sort of a lot of players just kind of migrate away and try other things. Maybe those will come back because of the new book, right? And at the same time, you see lots of weak and popular things. And to me, what that says is, again, as we talked about in the last slide, there's just a lot of people play armies because they have a deep love for them. And by the way, weak doesn't mean these people do bad. Let me be 100% clear on that, right?
Yeah.
So again, and we'll dive into that more in upcoming slides. So like, because we're going to eventually talk about what it means to like, quote, I think a lot of people have this fear of like meta chasing and stuff like that and see it as this dirty pool. I don't actually think it happens a super duper amount. Like I just don't see it in the numbers. Everything I've seen in our surveys, in the tournament data, says that yes, there is some movement to go to more powerful armies. Like, it's not that it's zero, right? It's just that most people tend to play armies that they want to,
Yeah.
not that they feel they have to.
I think it's a big thing, right? That you go to, that you go to an event and you're like, there's a 1 in 3 chance of facing Seraphon. Not, it's not 2 out of 3. It's not 60%. It's not 70%.
Right.
And even among like top players, right? Top players who are winning, who are averaging, almost 5 wins per tournament. You don't tend to see them on the best army at every event. They're probably like, they've always played, a high A, low S tier army maybe. But when, they're, I know in Scotland, one of our best players, he's like, okay, he plays Daughters of Cain, he plays Slanesh. But, when like Hearthguard Berserkers are the best army, he's not playing them, He's
Right.
like, I'll just keep playing this army, even though it's worse, because, it's one of the armies I like. I want to sort of play the most powerful army that I like, rather than just, I don't, as far as I'm concerned, these are just bases.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Absolutely. I was surprised to see Fire Slayers in the popular list, as that has to be only boosted by tournament thing, because overall Fire Slayers not popular. In every survey we've ever done of players' collections of stuff,
Yeah,
most of the rest of these do appear. Slanesh also tends to be on the lower end, but like Fire Slayers is almost universally the lowest standard army every time.
So that might be, it'd be interesting to compare those stats, but that might be one of those armies that's only up there because it's so strong.
Mm-hmm.
Because
it sort of makes sense to me, even, right? When I look at, like, when I think about a block of Hearthguard Berserkers and how hard they are to kill, I'm like, I wish that was, I don't even know the name of them, the little dwarves completely covered in metal. I'm like, that would make so much sense to me, that no matter what you throw at them, you can't move. And it just, I feel like, yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like Fire Slayers, sort of the way they play in competitive lists, don't capture the sort of Berserker vibe.
Right.
And so, like, I'm not surprised for you to say they're low popular, because I feel like they just have a hard time fitting their on table to their sort of like lore thematics and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Tom, anything from this list jump out at you?
I mean, not really. I like seeing Iron Jaws up at the top. That's exciting.
Boy. That's right, because it is a fun army. It's fun distilled into army form. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, and actually, I've been recently looking at some stats. I've sort of been breaking down the meta into like, what are the strongest armies if you're like, you're trying to get 1 win in an event, if you're trying to get 2 win in an event. And Iron Jaws is like the best army in the game. If you're like, okay, I get normally 2 wins and I want to push into being a 3-2 player, Iron Jaws is the strongest army in the game to do that. And
that completely makes sense
cool
in my head.
Yeah. Well, I think it's it's like a cool thing that I sort of hadn't thought of before about, we sort of talk about, Seraphon's so strong, Change Host is so strong. If my friend was going to a tournament for the first time ever and they were like, oh, I want to do well, I wouldn't be like, take Change Host, if they hadn't played Age of Sigmar before.
Right.
I'd be like, take, Big Wa is a good one, right? Powerful and rare. Take Big Wa, take Iron Jaws, right? And I'm not flaming anyone that like, oh yeah, anybody can win a million games with Iron Jaws, but like, that's going to teach you some meat and bones Age of Sigmar, that if you are not so confident with tournaments or the game, you're not going to learn as much playing Change Host, and you probably won't do as well.
Right. Yep. I will be very interested to see if we get some movement down here in this area where it says Night Haunt in weak and popular. They're already popular. Let's see if that moves a little over the next year.
Straight to the top.
That's right. Okay. So let's keep going. Next up, small change, big difference. This is one of my favorite charts you sent me, JP.
Don't at me. I thought about redoing it, and I just couldn't find like the data set that I'd used off, and I was like, we're just going with the old school green and blue lines on a plain white background, way too zoomed out.
So sorry about the very small numbers. That's why we're doing this in big mode, so that everybody hopefully can see it. This says December 19. This says November 19, just so you all understand. But okay, so the green line is the average Slanesh event score. So this is over 2019, basically, right, where this is happening. The important part is their book kind of comes out here, right? And then we go boop, 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 and then this downward trend kicks in. Now, the relevant part here is this blue line, which is the average Slanesh performance delta, like how far a player's Slanesh results deviate from their normal results.
So that's like the player power boost we were talking about before.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So Slanesh, which was dominant from its release in 2019, started slipping even before the FAQ. I have the FAQ marked here. Like, this is where the FAQ happened, right?
Yep.
But it was already on the downslide on event scoring. But players playing Slanesh still saw similar results, right? So it remained more or less stable. But what you saw is a lot of top players leaving the faction. So it was getting less score, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, this was one of the first, like, when I really started looking at, like, okay, how much is the faction, how much is the player? And I was pretty stoked that the graph looked like this, because I think, you basically, again, bunch of top players winning events with Slanesh. And, Slanesh exists for however long it does. And then, I think people know that there's going to be a change coming. And people just are like, I played this army a bunch. So, I'm happy to move on to something else. And so people who just want to win tournaments are like, I'm going to switch to something else because this is going to be getting some sort of change to make it less powerful. And you see just dramatically the performance starts to go down so much. And you're just like, oh, the faction is getting worse. And you're like, well, actually, it's just so much of that is if you have 3 players, again, because Warhammer is a small sample size. If you have 3 players bringing Slanesh to events and winning event after event after event with it, then it's going to have this crazy high win rate, crazy high score, right? And then if they leave, you're just left with everybody who was playing before. And it's like, if you're a Slanesh player going 4-1 with your army, and you go 4-1 with your other armies, and they, it does, obviously your results stay the same when they announce an FAQ is coming, or when everybody says on Twitter there's an FAQ coming. You see this blue line stays stable, but there's such a big effect in sort of the traditional ways we were viewing army performance that it was nice to see that it's like, and that, again, not to say that Slanesh was not better than other armies. It's just that effect gets magnified when, like we saw with the Seraphon event wins, when all the top players are like, tell me what the best class to play is. Okay, I'm going to take that then.
Right. Now, it's important to note here, this doesn't run to 0, by the way, just so we're all clear on the numbers on this side. This score is like 64 to 50, so like that's the kind of trajectory of what's going down here. But that's a big jump, right? So falling down an average of sort of 14% over 2019 in this performance rating. Again, I think your point is well taken. Like, think of the number of events that happen in the world with AOS. Again, we're using 2019 since that's when we had a lot of events going, right? If there's like 1 event a weekend, maybe 2 sometimes, that doesn't amount to a huge amount of stuff. If you've got 5 players who abandon the faction, who were all, getting high marks, that can have this huge impact on sort of Slanesh's overall appearance, quote unquote, in the meta, right?
Yep.
And my expectation, this last note I have, is that since this is representing kind of events, I would expect your sort of casual games to lag, right? That is to say, like, you would see the same, my guess, we'd have no way to measure this, but this is complete conjecture. But my guess is if I was able to somehow survey casual games, I would see the same curve, it would just be slower.
Yeah, you'd be like, I mean, it'd be super cool to see, and I've thought about doing it before. If you could track sort of popularity of the army among people who are more active in following the scene on the internet, and you're like, so you see Slanesh drop off, everybody who's in the Slanesh WhatsApp group, right, stops playing them when it gets announced they've been nerfed. And then, as you say, over the months, people sort of catch up and are like, well, no one plays Slanesh. I don't want to play Slanesh.
Right. Yeah, this is like, you sent this along and I was so thrilled. The Slanesh effect. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, like, I doubt this picture looks much better now. Okay. So, but hey, big demon's coming. All right. So let's go to the next one. So let's with all that set up, let's get into skill. There's so much on this page. I kind of broke up your visual that you sent.
Yeah. No, good work.
Spread it around. So ultimately, when we're answering the question, the banner, the headline is skill is highly determinative, but not completely. And we'll get into it. Like, trust me, we're not to the best slide yet. We are going to get to a slide here. That when JP sent me this image, it blew me off my chair. Okay, it's coming.
Mhm.
It's when I was still learning about how to display graphs. I sort of went to the other extreme.
So, but some factions outperform when placed in the hands of lower skill players. So there's a lot on here. Let's start with actually the big center of this chart. Okay. Let's talk about the underdog win rate. All right.
Yeah.
So break down sort of the underdog win rate, neutral win rate, favored win rate, or overdog. That's what we should call it, by the way.
Yeah,
overdog.
Yeah.
Overdog.
Yeah. So basically, internally, ListBot uses like a known algorithm for calculating like player skill. It's used in like a lot of online video games and stuff like that. So basically, when you win, you're getting plus elo effectively. When you lose, you're getting minus elo, and that depends on who you win or lose against. And it's like chess. And one of the things it also provides you with is it says like, okay, is this game like for this neutral win rate? It's like, is this game basically considered a high quality game in terms of elo gain or loss? So that's when you're playing someone who's like a little better than you or a little worse. And it's like, okay, one person is not going to dominate the other person here.
Right.
So we sort of strip those games out, and there actually aren't very many of them. Again, we tied it back to Age of Sigmar before to sort of, it's not a super competitive format. You get a random first opponent, and so your second opponent is like half random, right? So often you go to an event and you might just play one game against a player who's at a close skill level to you. And so we sort of scrape those out in the neutral win rate section. But then we have the underdog, which is where, this faction was sort of, was considered by the algorithm to be like a significantly, not insanely, but like statistically significantly worse player than their opponent. That's the underdog win rate. And then the overdog win rate is when they were, again, they were by their player skill, they were favored to win it.
Right.
And again, in general, you're going to see that the favored win rates are high and the unfavored win rates are low. And at the time, this sort of again ties into the player power boost a little bit, but at the time, Caradron Overlords were top, along with basically joint with Ogre Maw tribes, with sort of 1 in 4 games where it's sort of you would expect them to lose based on the sort of the player skills involved. They were taking the win, and again, I always want to try and think, there are a lot of other factors here, right? Maybe people hadn't figured out how to play play against Caradron Overlords. Yeah,
sure.
Maybe a lot of players were playing the old Caradron Overlords book, which was weak, and so sort of their elo was lower than their actual skill level. And then the new book comes out, they keep playing it, and suddenly they're winning these games that previously they'd lost. There's a lot of possible explanations there, but it's also I think maybe part of it is just like how sort of is the faction, is the faction strong and in an easier to play way, right? I think Daughters of Cain is my favorite one. Daughters of Cain, here we go.
This is like the best. This is the best set of stats to any of these. The Doc one is incredible.
If you're a Doc player in chat, hats off to you. But it's just nutty so they played 33 games where they were the better player, and they won every single one. And they played 22 games as the weaker player and didn't win a single one. So basically what that's saying is for Daughters of Cain is like this army will do exactly what you tell it to. It's like if you are a really great Daughters of Cain player, and I know they've obviously been very strong. They've been levels of strong all through Age of Sigmar. But they are a fiddly army. I haven't looked too much into games with the new book, but like you've got to be in range with auras. You've got that stacking over turn time buff. They are, if you're missing these players, you might be squishy. So you can't always just go in. And I think that's just super cool that it's like, basically if the Daughters of Cain player is a lot better than you, you're just in big trouble, basically. Right. And if they're worse than you, you're not in any trouble at all. But it was basically just really cool to see Daughters of Cain, to see any faction with the actual 0 and 100%. They also won all their neutral games, apparently. So that could be like 3 games or something.
Sure.
I thought that was super cool. And again, you see it sort of to various extents for all the factions. But yeah, it was definitely a cool thing to look at. And it's possible, KO. You're like, I personally don't like playing against KO. because I feel like they can cover a lot of their mistakes in the movement phases by teleporting. And I think a lot of the skill in Age of Sigmar is movement phases. And so then maybe that's part of it. You know, again, maybe it's not. I don't know.
Right.
I'm not a wizard.
Yeah. So and if you look in the lower right, you'll see there that the 2020 data set, KO won 110 out of 123 games, where the better player won, where they were the overdog, right? That's what's on the chart. That's a great win rate, right? So the better player has piloted this army to about the standard, because 90% is sort of our standard, where there's a 15% gap in ELO, right? So they're right on.
Yep.
But they also, in 24 out of 89 games, managed to basically punch above their weight.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a good number of matches for them to be punching above their weight in. And it's interesting to me that KO and Ogres are the two big underdogs. Not too surprising to me, honestly, because KO are sort of the kings of power projection in this like long range shooting combined with extreme teleporting mobility. Right? And Maw tribes are the kings of like, I can snake the game because you missed one small thing, right? Because I'm rolling around with guys that are worth 10.
I mean, right, you could sort of just be like, you know, if you're playing Maw tribes and you run to fight your opponents and they're on the objectives, sometimes you're going to win that game sort of, you know, without thinking about it too much. And again, remember, I think I never want anyone to get the impression that I'm like flaming their faction. Because again, you're talking about 25%, right? You're still talking about 1 in 4 games. You're sort of, which, you know, even, you know, most factions are sitting at 10%, right? Because there's dice and people make mistakes. So it's not insane. No one's like, oh yeah, you could just take over more tribes and win whenever you want, no matter how good you are. So no one's getting flamed. But yeah, there are some armies, obviously, and it makes sense that they'll exist, where they get a little bit more for free, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see situations where you'd be there in Maw tribes where, like, okay, I've got this, you know, guy on a Stonehorn on an objective. You don't have 10 people in your army. You don't have any units with 10 models anymore. I'm just going to win this because you can't kill my Stonehorn fast enough, right? Like, I'm not saying that's a common situation. I'm saying it's all about mounting up those edge cases like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that's one of those armies that can often have those edge cases occur. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Tom, what do you think about KO being at the top? Is that you're
I mean, that doesn't
Tom as a
surprise
perennial underdog.
Sure.
Does that check out to you from your experience of playing KO? I mean, you've piloted quite a lot of KO.
Yeah, because I mean, what it does is it gives you the ability to make the right decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, like that's a lot of what's going on here is are you able to make the right decisions?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
Like it sort of, we've covered it already, but like if you're a Daughters of Cain player and you're like, I really need to kill that Lord of Change, your options might be somewhat small in how you can do that, right? If you're a KO player and you're like, I really need to kill that Lord of Change, you know, it's a bit easier. And Maw tribes in a slightly different way. You're like, if you're like, you know, if you're playing Daughters of Cain, you're like, I really need to get this objective. You're like, okay, well, I got to get my unit on the objective. I got to make sure it's backed up by the right heroes, stuff like that. With Maw tribes, you might just be like, oh, well, they're bad guys there, and I've charged them because I want to kill them. And you're like, also, by doing that, I'm also on the objective for 10 models. You know, in a way that if you're playing Gristlegore, you're like, well, even though I've killed, you know, a bunch of these, like I've wiped out this unit of infantry, the guy's still got a hero on it behind them, and so he still holds it because I'm just one dragon, he's just one guy. You know, whereas Maw tribes can be like, okay, I've killed that screen, and now I hold the objective. So they just, as you say, again, that's not how everybody's going out and winning their Maw tribes game, winning their Maw tribes games, but it's just good. It just seems like those edge cases are going to come up more often.
Yep. So let me now get to the summation of this slide. There's two critical points I want to make here because I think they're so absolutely important for people to take home about how much skill matters. Because as we're answering the question this show posed of does skill matter or does army power matter and should people just meta chase, there's two things that are going to set us up for this in a big way. Okay, top right, as I already mentioned, 90% is sort of the skill expression here, right? Where there is more than a 15% gap in ELO, the higher rated player is winning more than 90% of the time. What that says is that skill is determinative 90+% of the time.
Yeah. Again, that's actually, like, again, that's basically all 5 of your games at an event, right? It's sort of a little bit less. Right. You go to an event, all of your games are probably determined by your by how you play. Now, not all of them, right? Obviously, you're going to go to some games and you're just going to, maybe you make a mistake, you get really unlucky, you get, a really bad matchup on a bad battle plan. But I think this is an important number when you talk about what balance means in Age of Sigmar. And it's one that I sort of, a friend of mine, shout out to Blagan, who's designing a new version of Age of Sigmar where Beasts of Chaos are good, as far as I understand it. But, when you're talking about game balance, it's, you can look at how good our Seraphon compared to how good our Gloomspite gets. And that is, that's an important thing to look at. I'm not saying it isn't. Right. But when I'm thinking about, rather than balance, sort of competitive health of the game, I'm like, this is the stat I want to look at. I want to look at, can I go to an event and I have a balanced experience where my results were mainly dependent on how I played? That, like, it's a different form of balance. And I don't think it's like GW should just abandon, buffing Gloomspite Gits. Obviously, buff Gloomspite Gits every day, please. Sure. Buff Trolls.
We'll get a Gloomspite release with Kragnos and a Gloomspite release with the Soulblight Gravelords. You're in my camp. I understand.
Exactly. But in terms of, like, as I say, the competitive health, the balance that you as a player will experience going to tournaments, it's going to be your play. And part of that is also in list building. That's not totally unincluded. It's not like, okay, if we took the best players and we gave them a deliberately bad list, like the Gloomspite Gits list I'm building right now, because it's got all the models I like. But, like, if you do that, we're not saying, that person would still win all the time. It's just, when you go to actual events, people are building, they're like, okay, I'm building these lists, like, as all that part of that stuff. It's like you are sort of in control of your destiny. And we can see over here in this little pie chart at the bottom right.
That's where I was going next, buddy.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so let me answer a comment real quick. So Sea Monkey said, would you consider understanding the larger meta, knowing how most armies play, what units do? Would you consider that as part of skill? So the answer is yes, that's definitely part of skill. But remember, we're backing into skill, right? We're using this ELO calculation that's, like, basically about comparative win rates and against strength of players and how they've performed overall and stuff like that. But theoretically, yes, the players who... So, like, it's sort of opaque what's making that player be good to some degree, right? We can watch them travel across factions and continue to have a high win rate or do well at events or, go 4-1 or 5-0 or whatever. But we don't know the composition of what they're doing. Like, are they a great table general? Do they really understand all the units in the game? My answer is probably all of that stuff, right? Like, this is something that a lot of other games you kind of, it's easier to kind of quantify because we know what makes a great player in those things. Like, when I look at a great Magic player, some of the great Magic players of the history of Magic, right? If I look at, like, an LSV or somebody like that, I'm playing against them. I set down the first card I have. Like, I play one card against them. Like, I drop one card. And they've got a pretty good chance at calling 5 out of the 6 for the rest of the cards in my hand.
Yep.
Right? Like, that's blind information. They're seeing the backs of my cards. And if I said, guess what the 6 cards are still in my hand, they could probably get 5 right.
Yep.
Because they know your whole deck.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, there's a level of skill here that absolutely is knowledge-based as well as many other things. Okay. Now, anyways, let's talk about this. People talked about, like, the big concern is always meta chasing. So, and like, what this chart says to me is, nope, because the worst, I want to direct everybody to this dark...
What it says is, you can meta chase if you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but it's not going to do much for you. Because right here where we see the worst player with the better faction, right? So theoretically, that's everybody's sort of net listy fear.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Somebody who hasn't built the muscle, they haven't built the skill muscle with an army. They went out, they just grabbed the better faction, they chased after this thing. That only works out for them as a win 10% of the time. It's not nothing. It's something. Yeah. They are getting better. Like, they're improving, right? It is increasing their win rate, but by half a game.
Yeah, exactly. and if you're going to a three round tournament, right, by not even, right? So it is sort of that exact thing of like, look, if you are, and this is again is talking about that sort of magnification effect we see with Seraphon. If you're a player and you're like, look, I keep going to these events, I get to the last game of the tournament on table 1, and I just keep losing. I keep coming second. And they're like, I really want to win an event. Then I'd be like, you know what you should do? You should swap to Seraphon. You should play Change Host, right? You should, if what you really want more than anything in the world is to win your next event, take the best faction. Like, why wouldn't you?
Right, when you're already that 4-1 player,
yeah, exactly,
who's on table 1, losing it for the pole position. Thankfully, I've never met anybody, and there's no one currently in this podcast or this show right now who happens to be in that position.
Yeah,
nobody
exactly.
who would know anything about that. Okay, continue, please.
So it's like, yeah, if you're that person, you're like, I can't push it over the edge, then I'd be like, yeah, you probably want a 10% boost to your win rate. But if you're a person coming to me and you're like, I've just started going to tournaments, I'm getting 2 or 3 wins, I want to get to start pushing 3 or 4 wins at every event, then I'm not going to tell you to swap to playing Change Host. Like, and that's not, again, like, not because I have anything against net listing, but just because that's not going to be what's going to push you forward. What's going to push you forward is all those, the long list of things that make players better, and a lot of that, like, if someone came to me and was like, I've been playing Gloomspite Kids. I just did a cool thing with Wargamer Online, talking to Matthew Davies, who's sort of, he's got a 70% win rate with Sylvaneth in a book with a 48% win rate. And he's like, I have a totally different list to everybody else. And I think I play in a bit of a different play style. And he's just doing it. And it's like, if you're a player who's going, 2 to 3 wins with Sylvaneth, right? You can become a player that goes 3 to 4 wins with Sylvaneth without swapping factions.
Right.
You do not, and that's not to say if you want to swap factions, right? If you're like, I don't like Sylvaneth and they're weak, and I'd rather be playing some other faction, then do it. But it doesn't have to be the best faction either, right? I think, again, like we talked about before, you could sort of scroll down the tier list until you get to a faction where you're like, I actually do really like those models. You're like, okay, I don't want to play Seraphon, I don't want to play Deepkin, I don't want to play Daughters of Cain, and then you get to, whatever's there, Disciples of Zinch, you get to Flesh Eater Courts, and you're like, you get to Nurgle, and you're like, oh, these guys are sort of, they're above average, they're a strong army, I love the models, play those, right? If you love your models, if you think the rules are cool, if you love building lists for that faction, you're going to enjoy playing your game. This is the same advice you give to almost anyone doing anything, right? You're going to enjoy your games more, you're going to enjoy the learning process more, and you are going to get better results. Again, I'm not saying if you're going to, ETC, you should just play, whatever your favorite models are, because it makes no difference, because it does make a difference. But it's just, you're not going to beat the people. If people are beating you, it's probably not because of their army.
Right.
So, like, if you buck up, like, if you just, again, yeah, I'm just repeating myself. But yeah, the better you get, you're just going to find yourself winning all those games.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So, yes, the answer is that the answer is that skill is this highly determinative thing, and ultimately what's going to yield the most benefits is understanding the game better, understanding all the armies better, understanding your army better, understanding the scenarios better. Like, I feel like that's sort of fairly obvious when you say it on its head, right? But it's easy for us to get trapped in this conversation of like, oh, the army becomes so determinative, right? Of, oh, it's just Seraphon, I might as well throw my hands up. Well, that just isn't that isn't what the data says.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if it's Seraphon and they're a significantly better player than me, well, that's unfortunate. Okay.
You're in trouble.
Yeah, you're.
But it's one of those things where I think one of my favorite examples is like, we have a player in England, great player, Tony Moore, plays Grand Host of Nagash, has played it forever, right? And he's got like a 85-90% win rate with Grand Host of Nagash. Nagash has a 30% win rate. Grand Host of Nagash has like a 35% win rate overall. And it's like, if you rock up to the draw at your tournament, you go up to the big board and you're scrolling along and you're like, okay, it's me, who am I against? You're like, okay, I'm against Grand Host of Nagash. You're like, nice, not super strong. Then you keep scrolling. When you see Tony Moore's name, you're like, oh, I think I've lost. Like, that would be the thought process for most people who know him, not the other way around. I don't, like, if you were like, oh, here's this guy, here's my friend, I beat him every time we play at home, and I beat him every time we play at an event, you're not going to keep scrolling and being like, oh, he's playing Seraphon, I think I'm going to lose. You'll be like, no, I know this guy, we played a bunch and I beat him. So like you can be reasonably confident, you know. It's like I think internally people do know about this, and sometimes people get into arguments in the WhatsApp where they're like, okay, you can only count the events, you know, where you're equally skilled and there's no extreme luck either side. And it's like that is a data set, not one we really have the numbers for, and that is a data set, but it's not how we play Age of Sigmar, right? It's not. No, it ties into what we were saying before. You can't just walk up to an event and be like, I'm only going to play people who are just as good as I am and never fail their 9-inch charges, because it's just not a real. That's not a real opponent. You're going to go to, again, you're going to have a random opponent turn 1. You're going to have a half random opponent turn 2. You're going to have a quarter random game 3, and you know, just be really good.
Right. I mean, Tom and I have built a whole team's career on just rolling 9, so sometimes you can't.
I mean, that is a true statement. That said, I mean, the reality is, you know, I've talked on the show before about I really don't pay attention to my first 3 games. Like, my first 3 games simply don't concern me because statistically, like, I'm just going to be in the mix. I'm not going to hit like Relian in my first 3 picks at like an Adepticon size event.
Sure.
Like, there are exceptions like that where like I'll have like a really bad draw right early on in an event, and by bad I mean I actually end up hitting somebody who it gives me a really tough game. But the reality is that like I plan for games 4 and 5 because games 4 and 5 are going to be the make or break for the event for me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could sort of math that out, right? Let's say if you're in the top 10% of players, right? Then your game 1, you're better than 90% of the field, right? Your game 2, you've jumped that up, and now you're sort of better than 40% of the field, right? You don't get up if you are in the top 10% of players. You don't get up to that sort of percentage until you get into those last games.
Yep.
And it's like, so most of your games, and again, that's not to say, you know, I've lost games where I was playing like a very overpowered faction, had a loss to Chaos Dwarves. I had a much better faction. I underestimated my opponent, and I just made a bunch of stupid mistakes and lost the game. It's definitely
I've done that too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that stuff is always going to happen, but you can expect yourself sort of to be favored in the games. You're more favored in the earlier games. And again, that's why, again, because there's sort of this sparse field of skills, like there aren't 10 million people that play Warhammer. Right. Most games you're going to be quite a lot better or quite a lot worse in terms of like experience and skill and stuff.
And I want to hit something in the comments here. So Autumn Lotus said, if this is true, give a world champ a BOC army and show me his first place win. Okay, we'll do that. So that's like we can actually do that in real life. So and here's why I would say his name is Joel, or what's his name? Australian player.
Joel Graham or Joel McGrath?
Joel McGrath.
One of the Joels.
Joel McGrath. Yeah.
There you go. Who plays BOC. Regularly goes 4-1 at events, right? And often finds himself in contention with a BOC army for winning the tournament or being in the top 3, right? Because a lot of that's sort of where you end up in the top 3 often has to do with these like very lucky factors. So it's not. I actually generally rate like the person who gets 3rd the same as the person who gets 1st in my mind. When I'm looking at the event, because it's often sort of these really weird, soft, indeterminate things that sort of happen where you're there. At any rate, he's regularly in contention for that. The problem is when he hits game 5 and he's playing for that, Joel McGrath is a great player.
He has a handicap based on the army.
Right? But he's playing someone who's just as good as him.
Yes, exactly. Right. In game 5, he's playing somebody where there's not this huge differential between his skill level anymore and them. Like they also housed everybody, right?
I also want to give just a great example to that Autumn Lotus, which is the UK Masters, the last one that ran, was won by Dan Bradshaw. You know, and the UK Masters is one of the most, I think, competitive events probably in the world, right? And it was won by Dan Bradshaw playing Beasts of Chaos. You know, he was playing that Zangor Enlightened list, which, you know, it got nerfed. It's not a sort of, it doesn't fit in 2,000 points anymore. But at the time, it was still Beasts of Chaos. And it's not like everybody was like, oh, yeah, he's just playing that list with Beasts of Chaos. Like, he just rocked up to the Masters with sort of the 15 other best players in the country. And again, some in terms, you know, in ListBot's eyes, a good handful of the best players in the world, and won with Beasts of Chaos. Right. And it's like, again, I'm not saying, I don't think any of us are saying, look, Beasts of Chaos is just as good. And that if Beasts of Chaos played against Change Host 500 games, on table one, that Beast of Chaos would come out on top. But I think also tying into skill and army power, right, is there is also a bunch of dice being rolled, right? So if you say you go to that match, right, and you're equally skilled with your opponent, but they're playing a 60% win rate army, you're playing a 40% win rate army, and you just want to flat out say, okay, they've got 20% more of a chance to win the game than you, right? Or they're sort of favored, they're going to win 3 games out of every 4 that you play. You're like, okay, that leaves you 1 game out of 4, where you win turn 2, 3, and 4 priority. And that's not 1 out of 4, but like you win the priority rolls. You make the 12-inch charge to win the game. You're playing Nighthorn, and all your units get the 10. Like there is also that element of like, even when you're unfavored, that doesn't mean you're going to lose, because it's not a super high resolution skill, but it's not chess. You're not leveraging your 10% advantage to win. To at every turn you're 10% ahead.
Right, exactly. So that's what's important to remember, is that in that game 5, that's where the army can have a little more weight, because even if it's just a slight tilt against at that point, right, it's still a slight tilt against.
It can happen in such a
small, we're talking about such a small area here.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately, like that's where those armies, like that's where the armies that give handicaps or the armies that give those boosts really are going to matter, is in that final game or two, where you have similarly skilled, and what's handicapping you often is not the army or the odds, or I'm sorry, it's not the odds that are handicapping you or your skills, it's your army, and it's the options that you actually have available in the matchup itself. And so one way to say it would be to say that armies do matter at comparable skill levels.
So that'll be a great setup. Not that we couldn't talk about this. There's so much rich data on here, but I want to keep moving, because that's going to be the perfect setup, Tom, for this slide. This is the slide. This is the image that JP sent me that blew my mind right off the... Like, my head exploded out the back. Okay? So...
This is the evolution of green line good, blue line bad.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
so
sure.
What are we looking at here, other than a point graph? Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Set this up for us, JP.
So basically, each of these little dots represents like a player, basically. Yep. And as we go from bottom to top, we are sort of saying this. You can see on the left here in tiny sideways writing average event score, but it's basically like lower skills, new players, etc. are at the bottom, and the most top players are at the top. And basically, the closer you are to the right, the more your results basically look like they are sampled from the distribution of your player skill rather than the distribution of the faction you're playing. So basically, what that means is like the further you are to the right, the more your results are determined by your player performance. The further you are to the left, the more your results are determined by the faction that you're playing.
Yep.
And we see basically this cool curve. And again, probably, this is sort of when I was looking at stats that I think most people were already telling me. We look at the curve and it's like, look, and you've labeled it here. For players with lower skill, good armies can't save them. And what, like, if your friend's like, I've never played Age of Sigmar before and I'm turning up to a Warhammer event, it probably doesn't matter what army you give them, right? They're going to be like, what's a hero phase? And, probably win 1 or 0 games, right? Doesn't matter what army you give them. The easier the army, the better, probably. So it's not really going to look anything to do with how good their faction is. And again, on the other side, in sort of the top players, these are players who are averaging over 4 wins at an event.
Yep.
Whatever faction they're taking, they're going to do really well. Again, Richie McCallie, 90% win rate, close to 90% win rate with Gloomspite Gibbs. When at a time when they again had a 30 to 40% win rate. So they're doing well no matter what. And then as you get more towards the middle of the players, we see it swing more to sort of just past this 50% mark where, a lot of it is your faction in this sort of middle section.
Yeah. This chart blew my mind. I keep saying that, but I really mean it. I hope everybody's understanding the gravity of what's going on here, okay? So that's why I put these notes on the side. In the hands of highly skilled players, up at that top part, right? Army power becomes basically irrelevant. Okay? It just doesn't matter. Like, for the most part, they can take whatever they want and achieve very similar high respects, right? They're gonna they're going to end up going 4-1 and break for the 5 most tourneys or most type of things, right? Because skill is so highly determinative. Like, it doesn't matter if they're playing Seraphon or if they're playing Gitz or Sylvaneth. They'll end up, if they're a highly skilled player, they can overcome that. Now, again, when they meet their mirror in round 5, some of those things can be broken out. They might be the less favored to lose, so, it might break 2 to 3 against them or something like that. But whatever. Doesn't matter. The point is that it's so minorly relevant. That's why they're all at, like, up over 0.9 being how much it matters for them. All right? That is to say, the proportionality of how much their skill is impacting the game. But in this big, fat middle here, look at all these dots. Look at all these
where
dots.
the majority of players sit.
Right.
Yeah.
For all of us average players, okay? I'm going to include myself right on in there, right? It's making a huge difference. It's huge. How much does this imbalance matter, right? It matters a lot. It matters so much, right? For most of us, for most of you watching out there who are probably average players, like I said, I'm counting myself fully in this middle group, okay? The imbalance in the game is extremely painful because we're not in the top cohort, right? And so suddenly the power level of the faction is weighing in almost 50% of the impact on the win. Okay? That's what that drift toward 0.5, 0.4 to 0.6, averaging it around 0.5 means. That means that, like, the actual power level of the army itself now becomes hugely determinative to the outcome of the game. Right? So when 2 average players face each other, which again is what most of us are, right? Suddenly we see that, oh wait, actually the power differential between armies is so important. Because for people who are like, oh, Seraphon is unbeatable by me, I can't beat it, or whatever, right? Yeah, okay. Like, I believe that. You're saying you're an average player, right? And, like, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying, like, you're saying that's what we're openly admitting, okay? And the relevance of it is so important. Like, if there's any argument as to why GW should pay a lot of attention or more attention to balancing and not putting out, books that are sort of breakers of the bounds, this is the greatest example I've ever seen of it. This is mathematical reasoning. The majority of your players sit in a space where army power differentials are highly impactful on their experience of playing the game and whether they win or lose.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things where I think with any stats, as we sort of talked about, you've got to think about, like, why am I looking at these stats in particular? So it's like, yes, the last one is true, right? You can, as a player, if you are an individual and you're like, I want to win more games of Age of Sigmar, you can't make Croak's points go up. That's not in your power. So if you want to win more games at Age of Sigmar, you have to push yourself up this curve, basically. And by getting better, as we've discussed, you are going to win more and more and more games. Like, you are not going to hit an upper limit because of whatever faction you want to play or anything like that. If you improve your skills at the game, you're going to win more. That's totally true. But, again, if we want to say, okay, well, what's the game look like for people who aren't maybe necessarily super interested in, reading about every army book that comes out, all that stuff, you're like, then you also still, as we've sort of said, it's not that army power is irrelevant. It's just like, yeah, if you are an average player and you're just like, I want to go to an event, bring my book, see what's what, then, yeah, your faction is going to have, going to be about as roughly as important as how you play. Again, because you're going to come up against someone who's equally skilled as you, and you're going to be like, okay, we're both sort of playing. Neither of us sort of are so bad that we're making terrible mistakes that lose the game, or so brilliant that we're, overcoming the forthcomings of our army by winning it anyways. And we're just sort of going to hash it out and see who has the better book. If you imagine in the simplest case, right? If you had two players and both only had one war scroll in their army and one war scroll did more damage, you'd be like, yeah, that's probably going to be what determines the game. If all you do is just run at each other and see who wins, so it's like it's still important to, as you say, because most of your player base are going to be around in the middle, and you do want to keep the game balanced so it's more fun. But it also ties in, I think, to what I was saying before, which is, there's some extent you want to worry about the balance of the books in terms of that win rate, but also, and I mean, people go crazy obviously on the internet for negative player experience, but like you also want to make sure that the games you're losing or winning, you also want to make sure that the stuff we can't show on the graph, which is how much fun you're having in Age of Sigmar,
right. That the game still felt worth playing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
100%.
I think that's a little bit of something that I wish I could measure better, but that creeps up, which is just, if when people do lose to Croak maybe on that game 3, and it's like, okay, yeah, if you were better, you could have won. That's not much of a consolation if you spend 3 hours having a not very much fun game.
Right. Yeah, so like it would be easy, the sort of smooth brain take from this, right, is, oh, well, the answer is just get good. Right? Like, I mean, that's the smooth.
That's kind of what
take.
The data does say, right?
But it, like, again,
be a better player and your army doesn't matter.
There's an element of that, but that's not actually the take I get from it, because that actually isn't the root cause, or the sort of root of this that I see. All right, the root of this that I see is, one, we need to do a better job of balancing these books, and by we I mean GW, talking to you out there now. One, that's first, okay? Like, I've never seen a more clear proof point of that, right? And two, this graph solidified in my mind in a way that I'd never seen data do before the following 2 facts that I knew to be true. Okay? 1, when you look at events in countries, it's almost, or on TTS or anything, like you see the same names, players, popping up in the top 10, which is generally what I look at, right, to see who it is. Because, again, Game 5, a lot of different elements and ways that things can break against you, and bad luck. You got a bad scenario. You were on a 4-1 rip, and then you came up against Sons of Behemoth in round 5 on focal points, and it's like, okay, well, there's only so much I can do when they're scoring like 30 points a turn, and I can score 5, right. So, like, but you tend to see the same-ish top 10 players. Event after event after event after event, using completely different armies, right? The players will remain consistent, the armies will change, but the top 10 is just this murderer's row of people, right?
Yep.
Yet, at the same time, I know that there is this drastic imbalance in the books, right? I know that these things have to be true. It's prima facie evident that both these facts are true. And I was trying to figure out, how do you square those 2 things? And this graph actually puts it together in a way that nothing ever had before.
We're glad to hear it.
So there you go.
So balance is amazingly important.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Yes, absolutely. Like, look, because the reality of it is, most of us, again, myself included, will never be that top player. Okay? And what I mean by that is, like, one, who would want to be? Like, if that's really your goal in life, great, good for you. I'm happy for you. That's cool. Either you're possessed of such raw talent or drive or skill or whatever, or, you're willing to practice or put the time in your life to get there. That's great. That's awesome. I'm very happy for you. That's a cool thing. But, like, a lot of us, Age of Sigmar is a game for 36-year-old dads. That's the average AOS player. Okay? So, like, most of us have jobs and, partners, kids, lives. Like, we don't all have time to sit around every day thinking about nothing but AOS. And again, that's not a judgment. I know it's going to sound like I'm trying to smack people who do invest a lot of their life or get real good. It's not. Everybody has different tastes and wants to dedicate the very scarce time in their life to different things, right? And so the reason that balance becomes so critical is because a lot of us are just going to naturally live in that middle area, because that's about the amount of time we have and will we have to dedicate to this game.
Yeah, and you can also think about this, right? You can think about this as like, this is the data in the middle that is creating most of what we see of the imbalance, right? Like it's
because that's the majority experience.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where a lot of it's coming from. And it's sort of like, for example, ListBot, there's a thing I'm working on where it's like, okay, I feed in a player's history and their list, and I try and predict how many wins they're going to get at an event. And you can do 0 and 1 wins, 4 and 5 wins pretty accurately. Like 70+% of the time you can get those. 2 and 3 wins are almost indistinguishable by the machine. It essentially, you could just randomly predict. If you thought they were to 2 to 3 wins, you can just coin flip it and you'd be about as accurate as ListBot is at predicting that. And it's sort of like, there is almost like, that's almost the play testing section of raw bookness, right? Is that 2 to 3 win section where you're like, these are players who are, good enough, they can play the game. They're not making insanely good or insanely bad decisions, and they are whacking the books against each other and creating the win rate of these factions. Now, one thing that also tells me, though, is sort of what we were saying before about sort of these unexplored niches, is we don't know as much stuff. We don't know what like optimized Beasts of Chaos lists look like so much, because top players aren't picking them up that often, because they don't, outside of a couple, we don't have the same amount of data for top players playing Beasts of Chaos as we do Seraphon. We don't know what optimized Beasts of Chaos looks like. We mainly know what sort of the middle Beasts of Chaos looks like. And it sort of means we have a lot of unexplored space. And again, if we talk about that event where if you were going to an event with the world's best players, right, 30 of the world's best players, and you went and played that event every week, I think you would start to see a very different meta evolve, because there you can start sitting there and going like, well, I can't just play Seraphon because half the people are playing Seraphon. So what's good against Seraphon? And you would have this very different meta evolve than the one we have in Age of Sigmar, where like the way we run events, again, in this sort of inherently uncompetitive way, where you're like, I'm maybe getting one event against someone who's just as good at me, and we're just going to throw down in the tape, right? We're just going to throw our army books down.
You're getting one game against
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And that, and so you're basically at that point, you're like, a lot of your data is just coming from this, like, okay, 1 game per event, and Facehammer, less likely 2 top players meet, and there's less data on that. Exactly. And so a lot of your data is coming from sort of this weird place that isn't what you would consider optimal balance testing. What you want is, you want to say, okay, for every sort of tier of player, can we get 300 games played for every matchup?
Sure, if we were using a sort of ELO system to actually do matchups chess style, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because then you would suddenly be producing a lot more consistent data of skills. Yes.
But events could control for that, I think.
But I don't think they want to.
Yeah,
I don't think I want to.
We could have made a choice a long time ago to go towards some kind of ELO system. We all decided we don't want that.
No, I'm not even saying ELO. I'm saying that, like, I think that players are smart enough to self-regulate. And what I mean by that is, kudos to Steve Herner.
Oh, sure.
For how he has tweaked the Holy events in the last 2 years. One thing that he has done is people choose their matchups. And so there's a drafting where everybody like chooses which table they want to fight on, and then in the back half of their drafting, they choose either to like chase players or go to other tables. And what ends up happening is in day 2, you have all the top players headhunting all the other top players because they need to knock them down a peg. And so what ends up happening is that the pool that was going to be competing already are already fighting after each other. They're pursuing one another because they need to make sure that other player doesn't get 5 wins.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, I think that is super cool. I think that sounds super fun. And I think in some ways you're touching just on the fact, which is that in general, what motivates a lot of people, and this ties into what we're saying about why Gloomspite Gits are so popular when they're not that strong, why Nighthorn is so popular, is that we want to basically pick the models we like, pick the list that we like, go to an event, and have mostly a fun weekend, rather than being like, I am searching to climb the ladder of, AOS. And there are, not to say there aren't people chasing their way up the rankings, trying to win events back to back to back, But as we say, what that mainly involves is them playing each other game 5 and, who wins out of that, because that's going to determine, who's rank 1 at the end of the year versus rank 2 or something like that. But for a lot of people, the way we enjoy Age of Sigmar is in this sort of more for fun method, right? And I think that's one of the things that I often say, that this is my sort of version into subjective, non-data backed opinions, which obviously I don't like to have. But that I would rather see more focus on the competitive enjoyment of the game than win rate based balance. Like, I think one thing that Age of Sigmar suffers from is like, we tend to have like good units and bad units and good armies and bad armies, rather than say armies or units that are good at things or bad at things, right? Like Flesh Eater Courts was like an amazing army for just look how much damage they put out from these monsters.
Sure.
And when they needed to be nerfed, it's like they just took that edge off the damage, right? They made it, you lost the ASF, everything went up in points. And so they were still the same army, but they still had the same sort of shape on the ListBot graph, but smaller. And what that meant is when something like OBR came out, and Petrifex originally was how it was, it's like, that would have been a great time to bring back the Gristlegore, right? And be like, whoa, with all the OBR running around, Gristlegore can just smash through those Mortek Guard. But they couldn't, because they're just a weak. So I would rather sort of see these nerfs come into armies' weaknesses. Like you take Flesh Eater Courts and maybe you nerf, maybe the casting of some of their spells. You nerf, how good their summoning is. Yeah, their survivability, exactly.
Hit the Terrorgeist survivabilities.
Yeah, hit that Terrorgeist spell for the 5-up ward save, stuff like that. And then you're like, look, this army still exists in this space. And even if the win rate was the same as it was, lower, you could be like, I play Flesh Eater Court because it's really good at this thing and that it does. And sort of, I'm less concerned, because most of your games are not going to be against equally skilled players, that I'm less concerned with like that exact win rate percent balance, and more concerned with being like, oh, okay, I've got a cool army that still does the thing that I wanted it to do when I bought it, and it's good in these situations, even though overall the win rate is the same as what it is.
I mean, to return to our earlier conversation when we talked about, like, one of the things we level set for this conversation was the concept that there's sort of two things that make armies really powerful. One is just their outright blunt force trauma that they can cause, right? Like they just don't die, or they just do so much damage, or whatever, right? It's kind of the very simple
the problems they present.
Yeah. The other one is the sort of toolbox capabilities that they have, the supplementary stuff, their ability to dig out, these other more ephemeral qualities, right? And when you get a really good army that can do both. And what you've effectively just proposed to metaphor it is, don't blunt the spear, shorten it.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
So like I mean, that's the best way I could describe it. Okay. This is all good. I want to keep moving because I know what's next.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's put the two together. So this was my little experiment that I had JP run that I was very excited about.
Yeah, this was super fun. Well played.
I am very happy about this. So I created a list of what I call the bad guys. Okay? So these are the bad guys. And I think this is largely backed up by the win rate percentages and stuff like that, and also just our general sense of living in the world. And so the bad guys are LRL, IDK, KO, Seraphon, Zeech, and Doc. Okay?
I don't know what you're talking about.
So they're bad guys.
I may have a couple armies on that list.
The good guys are everybody else. Okay?
So Fire Slayers are good guys?
They're good guys on this list.
Fire Slayers are good guys.
I thought about it a lot as to whether or not to put them in the bad guys list or not, but for this particular experiment, I left them out. Look, we could have an argument of exactly what goes in here. I wanted to do this because I think you see these 6. These are the usual suspects in the top 10. Mm-hmm. Okay,
and 6 is a good, nice round Warhammer number.
It really is. Yes. Number. That's right. Oh, they're on to me. So the point of this was, like, for example, what Grand Hammer just closed, or was just this last weekend, right? And the top 10 was basically this. It was just bad guys, right? And like 4 of them were Zeech or something. Okay. So the experiment that I wanted to do with JP was, I said, okay, let's take the bad guys as a cohort and put them against the good guys. Okay. Mm-hmm. And see what they're, instead of thinking about win rates and fat middle in the traditional sense of just one army against another army. What if we cohort them out, right? And examine them as two larger groups. Now,
like larger data sets.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the reason that I wanted to do this is because part of my supposition on why, because when we originally defined the fat middle as 60 to 40%, which we all agreed was wide, like the ideal world would be 55 to 45, but this is AOS, so we're just going to be generous and say 60 to 40, right? And what we've seen in a lot of the recent data, various sources, is that nobody's breaking these bounds in big ways for the most part. We haven't seen a lot actually going outside of, the 60% and 40%, right? And so my question to myself was why? Because it feels like there's so many of these armies that are just so clearly bigger. And so in my mind, it became the Three Stooges paradox. If everybody remembers that episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns can't die because all of his diseases are getting caught against each other and none of them can kill him, right? They're the Three Stooges stuck in the door joke, right? Okay, so my theory was there was just that these were all killing each other. And basically you had
the highest tier.
Yeah, you had like 6 alpha predators, right? But they kind of hold each other in check at 60%, but they as a group suppress everybody else. Okay, that was my theory.
Right.
And happily, I'm right. So when you
guess what, that's what the data reveals.
Yeah. So which is good. So at any rate, if you look at the overall win rate, the bad guys and the good guys define the fat middle bounds, right? Yes, they're holding at the 60-40. They're literally setting the edges, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so, but if you remove the top players, which is what I wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
Let's get rid of the top 25% and only look at the bottom 75% of players, right? Then all of a sudden, the numbers flip to 70-30. Okay. Like all of a sudden the fat middle explodes.
But one important thing to note here, right, is that in some ways this is going to be super expected, right? Because
keep going. You're fine. My dog.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. No worries. In fact, I don't even have anything interesting to say. I don't know. That's all I wanted to say. In some ways, this is expected. You carry on.
Sorry, we have a dog interruption, and people can't even see the dog. It's the worst. Anyways, so the but if you look at like just the, but if you look at the,
if you remove this player skill and just look at the performance of the groups, the bad guys way outperform the good guys.
Right.
When that top tier of player is removed.
Correct. Because if you look at the upper quartile and you compare the bad guys to the good guys, at the top levels of skill, the power of the armies disappears. They go 50-50. Okay? So then, Autumn Lotus, so to answer your question, why are most finals then the bad guys? Okay? Great question. Because the top players tend to be attracted to, they're the ones who are also the most psychologically attracted to playing one of the top armies, right?
Right.
Their dedication to, like, I want to be
profile.
the win, right?
Yeah.
Means they're going to go the hardest into whatever they perceive as being the most powerful. It's a correlation, not a causation. That's the trick. That's what this data set helps to reveal, right? Because what we see is that's how you get Joel still showing up in the top 10 with beasts or whatever, right? You, or you can pick your player in your army, right? Because there are those top players who use those non quote unquote top armies. But when you're talking about like psychographic incentives, those players are the most likely to pick the most powerful armies because they showed up being the most likely to be dedicated to winning, right?
Right.
There's a self-selection here. So it's not that the army is driving the top 10 as much as the player is driving toward the top 10 and picks the army they think is going to most likely get them there. Right?
I would affirm that logic procession.
Yeah. So this to me was such a just like, this is a single experiment. We could certainly do more along this line, but to me, it just absolutely told this story so succinctly, right?
Yeah.
Where, and by the way,
it's painful to look at.
Yeah, sure, sure, because it just says when you take out the top players who are effectively evening the numbers, right? Then what's happening is they're flattening they're hiding the overall disparity of the armies that we experience on a day-to-day basis, because most of us who are playing live in the 70 to 30 world, not the 60 to 40 world, and certainly not the 50 to 50 world.
And again, this ties into the fact that it's very hard to observe the stats correctly because of the way we play the game, because of these tournaments having so many games with high skill discrepancies, where it is the skill discrepancy determining the result of the game, that it's really hard to get at the actual stats, because not a lot of games are giving us good data on, how good was this faction. So again, that ties into what we're saying. We're basically just trying to back into, as you were saying, Vince, into that data from all these different angles to try and feel what's going on. And as you say, sort of to capture what people think is like, to sort of put into data terms the feelings people get about, oh, well, I went into this game against Seraphon and they really did smash me and it wasn't very fun, or etc.
So, Autumn Lotus, no, I didn't already have this conclusion written up. I ran this experiment and I would have, with JP, yeah. I said, here's an interesting theory, a hypothesis I want to test. That's how you test things, right? And the math came out like this. Okay.
And Autumn Lotus, I don't think anyone's saying, Autumn Lotus, that oh, there's no difference between the armies, or that the best player in the world, if they played Beast of Chaos, they would do just as well. These aren't really.
They would probably win 4 games most of the time.
And I think part of it. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say part of it is the resolution again of Age of Sigmar, where you play 5 games and the top players, even if they play Tzeentch, are probably going 4-1, because if there's 3 good players, there might only be one winning 5 games. So not everyone can come first. So what happens is, let's say you're a top player, right? You're in that top percentage, and you often go 5-0 and you often go 4-1. If you then play a weaker faction, that means you're really unlikely to go 5-0, but you're still going to go 4-1. Your results are essentially indistinguishable from your previous results. So it's not that the player is less likely to win the event, but their score will look almost the same because they're probably still getting 4 wins.
Exactly. And so I want to go back to one of Assistant Ref's questions, which was, he had asked a question a little while ago that, do you really think that if, say, half the best players all decided to play BOC, suddenly they would start winning events more than Seraphon? Don't they go for Seraphon because it really is better? So, and he says just not as much better as we normally might think. I think if you took half the best players and we forced them to all play BOC for a while, right? And we could get them into it, and we could assume they would put the same amount of effort into it, and that they would be as passionate and all of that. Assume we could cover and wallpaper over those sort of psychological things, right?
Yeah.
What this data tells us is that, yes, BOC would start showing up in top 10s everywhere. Now, would it necessarily record top 1s? No, because again, they might come down to, they're still the other half, the top players who are using more powerful armies, and that differential can have an effect, right? But suddenly, yeah, the top 10s would get wildly populated by BOC. That's just what would happen. And that's what all of the data here tells us would happen. And anecdotally, I look at stuff like Relian, one of the best players in the US, who went over, played Night Haunt, and nearly took out an event with it and ended up in the top 10 in the middle of when it was in the hard doldrums.
Mm-hmm.
Or FEC player out of Michigan, who's just one of the best FEC guys and was taking down events with FEC pre-FEC book.
Oh, yeah. The summoning list. I remember that.
Yeah, what's Bill? You played him. Is his name Bill? You played him.
Yeah,
Bill
Bill.
Are you talking about? Bill Sousa.
Yeah.
He's out of Pennsylvania, not.
Oh, sorry, Pennsylvania. I apologize. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to misplace you.
He's in. And Bill is an amazing player. That book just made him that much better.
Yeah. So I mean that there I have anecdote. Those are anecdotes. They're not data relevant, but I have seen real examples that back up what the data also here seems to point at, right? So there you go. There you go.
And again, I think it's important to iterate that it's no one is saying by the way, you should get good at Age of Sigmar because Beasts of Chaos are just as good as Seraphon. That's not true. And also a lot of these armies have different, like a lot of the time what you don't see in the data is when a top player plays Beasts of Chaos, they through blood, sweat, and tears get 4 wins in an event. And when they play Seraphon, they have 4 3-turn games at an event. And they might go 4-1 at both because game 5 they play versus someone who's just as good at them, and it's they lose all the priority rolls. It's a bad matchup. It's a bad battle plan, etc. So there is an advantage from playing those factions. It's just that if you are a normal tournament player and you're going to a 5-game event, your best bang for your buck in terms of getting more wins is going to be playing better. That's going to get you a lot more bang for your buck than playing these factions. And that's sort of the advice to you as an individual player is pick a faction you like, try and get an optimal list and play it really well. And you will be going for 1+ if you really do master that. Now, there's another side of this conversation, which is like, what if you don't do that? What if you're just chilling and you go to events and, you're not interested in winning the $10 million and the 1 lollipop, and you just want to rock up and have a good time, the faction balance is going to hit you harder. And that's why it's important to also keep the game well balanced. We don't just want to let balance run crazy and then say, oh, well, get better. You could still win, right. Because a lot of people are enjoying this as a hobby that is not solely centered around going to tournaments and winning games. They want to pick models they like. They want to go and have a good weekend away with all the other people who play Age of Sigmar. And, that's what's a lot of fun about it. That's why I think it's good we don't really use like an ELO system and seeded games and stuff like that. It's just, there are armies that you're going to have to work harder for, and there are armies that you're going to have to work less hard for. But at the end of the day, if you're a really good player, you're going to be taking out most of your games.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. I just want to talk about a couple of interesting items here. We got just a few more slides, and then we'll wrap this up. This is just more kind of point, this to kind of lead on to what we're saying here. These are like meta breaker people when we're talking about win rates at events. I picked a nice selection that I highlighted out here of different people. So meta breaker is another thing you can look at on the ListBot site. You want to kind of take us through meta breakers a little bit and kind
Sure.
of what this shows?
So meta breakers is basically capsulation of kind of the stuff we're talking. Basically, in the normal ranking system in the UK, for example, you go to an event and you get points based on how well you did. So maybe you come first at a big event, you get 100 points. You come second, you get 98 points, etc. Meta break is a similar idea, but your score is offset against the win rate of the faction that you were playing at that event. So basically, if you come first with Seraphon, you're not going to get very many points at all. Because maybe you had a 100% win rate, but the faction overall has a 65% win rate. But if you came, if you say come 5th with Sylvaneth or something like that, you're going 4-1. You're going, or whatever with these weaker factions, you're going to get more points. So basically, it's just an alternative rankings to say, and again, it's not to say that people winning with the top armies in the game aren't good players, because they are. But it's just another way to say, okay, if I play Sylvaneth and I'm doing really well, I'm like, I think it's cool to recognize those people and say, like, yeah, look, Book has a 48% win rate. He's almost got a 70% win rate, and he's just popping off. Martin Moore, 99% win rate, on a faction with a 56% win rate. And this year's been a little bit weird, obviously, for events and stuff. But right. That's the concept. Is just to recognize the people that we're talking about who are playing these weaker factions to high win rate standards.
Josh A says, where's Smorgan on this list? Well, Smorgan would actually have to play a recordable faction and not just whatever nonsense he happened to put together that is also, like, shockingly good. Smorgan is, like, we talked about top players versus average players and stuff like that. Smorgan is just, like, he's a dot off the map. He's in his own universe there.
So Brian asked, does that inordinately reward points to high skill rather than low power armies? It's kind of a mix. I do mess with the formula sometimes. Like, there, obviously, if you wanted to quote unquote abuse it, right, you could be like, I'm going to play Tomb Kings. I'm a top player who's won 12 events with Seraphon. I'm going to play Tomb Kings, go 4-1 in a bunch of events, and come to the top of this. This isn't really to catch anything aside from just saying, look at these cool people doing cool stuff with your factions. Because maybe you play Sylvaneth and you're like, I want to see someone. I want to see a different rankings where I can see these other factions and good players on them.
Yeah, I mean, so I just want to address Autumn Lotus. I really hope that's not the point that they take from this, being that I went on a 15-minute rant in the middle of this about how important balance is to literally the vast majority of their player base. So if they take that, they definitely missed the forest for the trees. I mean, what I've been trying to bang the drum of here is skill matters a lot, but most of us have neither the time nor the inclination to exist in the top 5 to 10% of players. And so once you get out of the top player bracket, the army and the balance matters a heck of a lot. So yes, I hope that's the message they take. That's the take home.
70-30 determinative, right? Like that was that measurement. That 70-30 was when you get rid of the top players. This is what your win rates end up looking like on those matchups of like lower tier armies versus higher tier armies.
Assistant ref, it's a small data set. Yeah, it's taken from your top 3 events. I think the 99% might be like a capped out 100% or something. So it might just be because he's played 3 events with Khorne and won all his games in all of them.
Right. So he went 15 for 15 basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Those 3 games.
So,
but it's not going to say 100%, right?
Yeah, for some reason it caps out at 99, or it might be a rounding thing. But yeah, again, this page, this Meta Breakers page, is not about like data capture or anything. It's just about having a sense of recognition of like, look at this guy, he's popping off with Sylvaneth. Look at this guy, he's popping off with, Blaze of Khorne. There's Tony Moore with his Grand Host of Nagash.
Yeah, well, it's to honor players that are making a decision consciously to play lower tier armies and still performing well at events.
Yeah.
Yep. So it can be done, right? Yes. Okay. Let's talk about the Filthometer. The average power level of factions at events over time. This was a real interesting chart you sent me that I thought would just be a little fun conversation to kind of cap off on here. The blue line being your sort of, the running average. By the way, this goes, what I loved about this was she went all the way back to like the beginning of Age of Sigmar.
The actual OG Age of Sigmar.
And I've highlighted this area here as having like, where like maybe the line didn't move that much. It got pulled up a little. But this like late 2019 period where we just had people really bringing some super filth. Like we were getting a few more dots up in this whole area right here.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, again, like this is sort of not much to say about this, but basically it shows that like, because I think people have been talking about, and I don't know if this is just a sort of, kids these days argument that we'll always hear, that like events even at the mid tables are getting more filthy really over time. And this is obviously like, it's the factions are adjusted for whatever factions were strongest at the time of the events being recorded. It's roughly the same. Like we aren't seeing more people gravitate towards filth. I think there is a conversation to be had about like power creep in the game, and maybe you are getting more games at the mid table that finish on turn 2 or something like that because power levels are so high. Like, there was a time in the beginning of AOS where if you played Beastclaw Raiders versus Ironjaws, you had like 3 special rules between your whole 2 armies, and now you both do loads of crazy things. So it may be more explosive, but there aren't really people, maybe a very tiny upward trend here, but there aren't really, you don't really see more filth at events than you did even when Age of Sigmar started.
Yeah, and what's interesting is obviously we have less events, so it's harder to tell, but there's a lot less hitting in this upper, like this way high outlier area here. So, I mean, given this only a couple of percentage points, but still, it's that we haven't seen as much of that. I hope that trend continues.
That was when Slaanesh was in the meta, right? At its height?
2019,
I think so.
This is like the height of Slaanesh, Broken Skaven,
Weird.
FECE. This is like, it's all in. This is like the dark days right here of 2019. Yeah, the summer of 2019, the horror. Yes. Okay. Let's see. And things are trending positive. So the haves versus the have-nots, the gap between the top and bottom armies is getting smaller. So not huge. Keep in mind, this delta is between 44% to 36%. Yeah. So I just want to, like, again, we're not going like 100 to 0. So this is bounded. But this, again, starts in like 2016, runs up to 2021. And what we see is that this filth gap, as it were, this power gap, however you want to think of it, is actually like decreasing over time. Although, again, where did we see the uptick? Oh, that's right. What is this down here? Yeah. The filthy summer of 2019.
Yeah, this is Carrion Empire, right? This is Fex Skaven.
Yeah.
I think the big thing about Fex Skaven as well is they were both filthy armies, and they're both super popular models that people already had. Yeah. Lots of people were like, cool.
It just ramped up so fast.
Yeah, It was a big jump in power, and lots of people. It wasn't like when Slaanesh come out and it was like, okay, like, do I want to buy this whole new range? It's people who are like, I have my Skaven, I love my Skaven, and now look, they've got super cool new rules. Like Vec and Skaven both sort of, set a new watermark for power levels. So I'm not.
I remember that very starkly. It happened 4 weeks before Adepticon dropped, and a bunch of those armies were at Adepticon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought this was a good chart. This was a nice note to end on, because it said we are moving in the right direction. Yeah. There's certainly a lot farther we have to go. But I hope we continue this general progress. Like, good, moving in the right direction. Let's keep moving in the right direction, right? And there's still more to go.
Let's not. Let's go back up. What I want to see more overpowered, crazy rules, less concern about balance, and more concern about fun. It obviously ties into Gith. I want to see just like Moon Clan Grots or Stabbers. I just want them to come back out of the Loon Shrine every time you kill them.
Sure.
And they just keep coming back. And
there's another direction we could go. We could have like everybody roughly balanced, but just always each year introduce one insane book.
Yeah.
Like introduce one FEC style, complete meta shatterer a
just
year.
Over the top.
Yeah, that's just so obviously over the top. And then what that'll do is the rest of us can all rally together
to defeat them.
To hate that army and just shame those people into not playing it. I mean, look, Ozymandias showed us that like humanity wins when it has an enemy, right? Yeah. So maybe we just need an enemy every year, somebody to really all get together and clearly hate, right? None of this spread out over like 6 armies. Like, some people
back
hate
when we had
Seraphon,
like first edition Zinch.
Right. Yeah. We need one clear, obvious, out of bounds, hated army. That's what we need.
Agreed. Or maybe, we talked about shortening rather than blunting the spear, right? We could just have loads of insane spears pointing in different directions. So you're like, Gloomspite Gith has infinite models and Flesh Eater Quartz has infinite damage. So they just remove the cap on Feeding Frenzy. You just pile in till your opponent's dead. Gloomspite Gith, the Grots just keep coming out of the Loon Shrine till you run out of time. And you're just like, I don't know who wins. You're like, the game just balance stays roughly the same. Maybe gets a bit worse. Game gets completely out of control. But
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, JP, thank you so much. I know this was a crazy data-driven show, like so much interesting stuff here. I think this was like really, really interesting in my estimation of just all the stuff that this data pointed to and revealed. And again, like, I don't think the point of this is to come to this and say we're providing like Bible truth, but this is a lot of more data pointing in a direction, right? Sort of like giving more strong evidence other than our suppositions and our feelings and our sort of gut takes that this is the structure of the world, that they do need to focus on balancing the books because it matters a lot to the middle group. That the thing I've always said, that like I've said this for years, I'm not worried about top competitive players. They'll take care of themselves. And this largely backs that up, right? Those top people, they're fine. Like, books are way powerful, books are way not. Doesn't matter to them. They're going to keep winning games. They're going to keep top 10ing because that's what they do.
Just collecting lollipops like crazy.
Yep.
Yeah. So for those that are in that higher tier echelon, the answer for you, if you haven't gotten a podium, is just keep rolling the dice.
Right.
Like, because at that point, it's literally a 50-50, like on performance at that highest level. So the answer of how do you get trophies? You just play more.
Yeah. Play more games, learn your army, like enjoy the game, try and learn other armies, like all of that good stuff. And that's good. That's going to push you up into podium territory. Again, if you're like, how do I come first at every event for the rest of the year? That probably involves you swapping factions. But I don't think really for most people that's their concern.
But even then, the data that it shows here is that right now in the current meta, that's
no, that's not possible.
There's no jumping to. There's not a silver bullet faction now. Because again, you have that headhunter group of like 6 factions.
Exactly. Yeah. No. So I meant if you're already in that group, like if you're already a top player, you're like, I come second or first at every event, and I want to stop coming second. Then it's like, you probably have a short list of factions you can pick from to achieve your goal.
Yeah.
But if you're one of these 6. Yeah, exactly. And again, even then, right, that's what you see with top players. It's not always people picking the top one. You're like, here are these, you pick your favorite out of the top factions. And I advise that, again, if you're a player and you're like, I've struggled with Sylvaneth, I want to win more games, then I don't think there's anything wrong if you're like, I want to pick my favorite faction that's got a higher win rate than Sylvaneth. I don't think that, like, I would say to you, well, you've been bad, you have to play Sylvaneth till you have an 80% win rate. It's like, no, it's like, pick a faction you like, and if you want to pick a stronger faction from wherever you want on the tier list, pick that one. Like, have a good time with it. But I know for me, sometimes when I've wanted to focus on improving, I pick a top tier army, because then I know it's only me letting me down.
Sure,
like I have no excuses. So maybe you want to do that, or maybe like you see some of the meta breakers who are like, I want to set myself a harder challenge. I think the point is just play whatever faction you want, and you can do well with it.
Yes.
There are no crippling factions out there.
Yep. All right. Well, very good stuff. If you out there liked this, hey, give it a like. Give it a like if you like Data. Give it a like if you like my dogs, who are all sitting asleep around me now and very upset because my wife dropped them off and then left. Give it a like because you think JP is a great dude and was very nice to create ListBot and share all this wonderful data with us. We really appreciate it. Liking the show is so easy. It's a little click of a button and it helps other people find the show. I appreciate all of you who stuck with us. I know this was some deep dive stuff. But JP, thank you, sir, so much for doing all this work and grinding all this out.
Thank you very much for having me. It was an absolute blast. Love chatting Warhammer. And I also love that I just look back at just this Slanesh model, and I'm like, yeah, it's important to remember that also this is what it's about, right?
You're absolutely right. I purposely left it up that way. She would come back at the end of all this and remind me again just how lucky we are and how Kragnos needs to come out like probably tomorrow, yesterday, 5 weeks ago.
Vince, you know what the best part about this is?
What's that?
There's not going to be enough of that model.
Well, 2 of them are going to be in my hands. I'll tell you that right now. There is no force on this earth.
Show's over. We're back to Curse City. I'm out.
There you go. So for all of you out there, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it very much. As always, we'll see you next Wednesday.